works, like the video, it for some reason makes lag and it slows down on the second monitor, which is really weird.
Well, most streams are going to be a couple seconds behind you.
Oh no, I mean the mouse on the
Oh.
second one is like slow all over the screen. Whereas when I drag it back over to the normal monitor, it's perfectly fine.
I
But
have
only when Discord is on video.
I have never had that problem before.
I have to admit, I am using an iPad as the second monitor through like iTunes to to plug it in.
I'm guessing
So
that's
it
got to
might
have something to do with it. I
that's gotta it's gotta yeah.
That's beyond my
I'm
tech expertise.
gonna try and okay. There we go. I just didn't want to have to buy another monitor, and just, like I don't have enough space on my desk for a proper monitor.
Yeah,
Um,
you got to work with what you got, and if you don't got the
yeah.
space, it's not a bad setup using it. It's just now you got to find out what the mouse issue. While you're sorting that out, I'm going to be right back, and then we should be good to go.
Okay, Karen. Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Shit. Shit. That is not DMCA. That is...
All right, I'm ready if you're ready, brother.
Okay. I figured out that I just drag Streamlabs over to the one that works, and then everything's fine.
Sure. If that doesn't work for you, you can always do a window capture and just window capture Discord, which is what I'm doing.
Well, I've got two frames, like a frame for your camera and a frame for my camera on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so if that works,
I
that works.
yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
makes it easiest for you.
Uh, I haven't got the mic on yet, though. 1 second. Okay. We are live on my end.
As am I on mine.
Okay. Gotta get Spotify out of the way. And there you are. Right. Today, we are doing a little podcast called Teacher Layman. And I'm NPC HCA, and this is where we take my dumbass and you lot on the journey of adventure through the highs and lows of Twitch expertise. And we throw that in your face with a little bit of laughter on top. I'm here with our good friend. Introduce yourself.
I am the Arcanist. I do Twitch stream. I do a lot of D&D workshops. I paint miniatures on D&D. I play with my characters. I've been playing since I've been like 9 or 8. Uh, all sorts of D&D through 3.5 and third edition, which we're not going to get into today. I mean, we might talk about it, but all the way now through fourth edition into fifth edition into what which is the current. So I've been playing D&D for a long time, so I'm excited to talk
Okay.
shop.
Okay. My computer just went all a bit weird there. One
No
second.
worries.
Um, okay, so we can just get into sort of basic questions to start with. What is D&D?
Well, D&D is I mean, to call it a game is weird. I mean, it's designed for fun. It's meant to be an enjoyable process, but it's more of a collaborative storytelling device. You've got two players. Well, you only need two things to really begin, but you'll quickly realize that D&D is one of those things that the more you put into it is the more you're going to get out of it exponentially. All you really need is some players and a dungeon master, and what you do between the two of you is just create a story where the DM or the dungeon master creates a world, fills it with characters, put strife in it for whatever reason, and the players who have designed a character with their own backstories and intricate ideas will then mingle and pretty much cause chaos in the DM's world, and from
Okay.
that, make a story together.
Okay, so the end game, the way you win is to tell the story together
What?
rather than any one person beating another. Is that
Yes, but I'd say the best thing to remember is there is no winning at D&D. That's one of the heavy things that the veterans will try to deeply express to other people, is that there is no end game. There is no win state. It's just, hey, you're in a room with people who are, or on a Zoom call, who are presumably uh, your good friends, and you're here to have a good time with them. It's not you're not meant to beat anybody else because you're all collaboratively on the same team. They're
it?
usually, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say yeah, um it sounds like the the collaboration is like the key reason the game is so popular.
Absolutely.
Like
Because it's not just the DM who's saying, all right, gang, today we're going to go fight a dragon, and this is how you're going to fight the dragon, and this is its weaknesses, and this is what you need to do. Go do these things, do all these objectives, and then the game is won. You might have, I might have the same scenario where I run 4 separate groups of 5 players through a game, which is like, all right, you're going to come to this town. Halfway through your journey, you're going to find out that the town's going to get attacked by a dragon. What do you do? You're going to have 4 different, wildly different things happen from game to game, because some people might be like, well, let's just attack the dragon directly. Let's fortify. Let's just say, fuck this town and get out of here. So it's kind of, to put a win state on it from the dungeon master's perspective would be to unfairly kind of limit what the players get to do, if that makes any sense. So because of that, it is very much a compromised sort of, like, not compromised. Everybody's got to compromise to make a good story.
okay, so that kind of flows into another one of my other questions that I thought about was so it sounds like there's a um a misunderstanding from my end a little bit there because there's I used to think that there was an opposition between the dungeon master and the players in a sense because the dungeon master has all the power to create everything
Mm-hmm.
while the players have to kind of fight against the narrative that they're creating.
Well, yes, this is true. It should never escape kind of just sort of friendliness. You, as much as I'm in here as the dungeon master to give you a challenge, And I tell everybody that I play with two things right off the bat. I always say, I'm going to try to kill your character to the best of my ability, and I'm going to make you cry at some point. And the whole purpose of that is because I want you to feel these characters. I want you to be in their skin as much as possible, and I want you to enjoy the moments that you enjoy. And you can't really do that if there are no stakes in a world. And there are no
Yeah.
stakes in a world if your character can't potentially die. If I send you, like, if every combat encounter is just like a handful of weak goblins, anyone can just come in and just rack over that and destroy them. And it's just like, all right, we won. Yay. But if, I send a dragon after them, or, a high level demon or something like that, and they actually have to fight to survive, they're going to enjoy and talk about that fight a lot more than say, like, yeah, there were some goblins and I cast like one spell and they all died. So while I want them to have a tough go of it, I never want to be like, haha, I hope all of my characters die. I hope everybody makes a new character today. Because at the end of the day, I know they deeply love their characters. But it's more of everybody has the best time when everybody operates completely functional. So that's kind of where the competitiveness comes.
Right. Okay. So, um, my computer just went all crazy again.
No worries.
1 second. I have an idea. Okay. Um, if someone wanted to take part in or learn about Dungeons and Dragons, how would they do it?
There's never been more ways to get involved in Dungeons and Dragons. There are local hobby shops, game shops, things like that. I promise you, if you go there, they will have a place set up for people who want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And every time I go to my local game shop, there's always at least one just kind of home game going. It's So you can try that avenue. If you want to just do it online, there are tons and tons and tons of online resources where you can go and meet other like-minded players or even new players, and kind of have Zoom calls, forum, chat. Roll20 is a good one. You just sort of play online. I don't enjoy playing online as much because I feel like it takes a little bit out of it. But at the same time, you got to give and take because, with the pandemic and everything, it is becoming a lot of people's go-to for D&D.
Yeah. I can imagine that the pandemic has made it very well, I suppose it's changed it rather than just made it difficult. Although it's made it more difficult, it's made it kind of easier for people to start who would not necessarily want to go into the game room.
Well, I know a lot of
They
people.
can just
I know a lot of people
go
have
on.
more free time now, so it's
Well, yeah,
easier to
there's
pick
that.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
like most
But
things,
like, I
it's
mean, for people with social anxiety and things like that, might find it a bit easier to ring their friends through Discord and just play together.
absolutely like most things. It's found a way to adapt, given all of this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, Now, why do you think Dungeons and Dragons? I think you might have answered this a little bit, but we might as well go at it a little bit more. Why do you think Dungeons and Dragons is so like capturing once you've started?
I think one of the big reasons why it's enjoyable is that you get the opportunity to live in someone else's skin for a little bit. You get to experience different perspectives that you didn't even know you had. Parts of your personality can be visited or rehashed more so than you'd normally get in everyday life. And I don't want to use the term escapism,
Yeah,
because that when you do that, you get into kind of the point where like, oh, it's like therapy, and therapy is something that you should find, never look for. The only place you should look for therapy is at actual therapy. But like golf is a good example of it. People who go to golf for therapy usually don't have a good time, but people who go to play have a good time can find it therapeutic. It's sort of like most hobbies or anything you enjoy, you can kind of unburden yourself, but at the same time, you can always be like, what would it be like if I took one facet of my personality and kind of spun a whole bunch of strings around that rather than this element of my personality? And we're going to go from there and explore and have fun. And I think that's kind of why it catches, because your first player will probably be what you want. Everybody's first character is always one of two things. It's either the perfect version of themselves or just a complete escapist, like, I'm going to get drunk and do this and, just kind of
Yeah.
just the ultimate id, like, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. But the more you play it, it's just kind of, you can do more nuance and you can do things that you didn't even realize, like, oh, what if I did play an evil character who was hiding that and did this? And you can just start, you'll find yourself finding concepts and finding things to get excited about that you never really thought you would.
Okay. So it's like although your main goal is to collaborate in an adventure, like an imaginary adventure, um, it seems like it's more an internal exploration without realizing. It's like if
Yeah,
you're going to put yourself in the character in any way whatsoever, you're expressing who you are a little bit. So it's like you kind of holding a mirror up and see what you could get out and put in.
absolutely.
Um,
And
so
there's
I
a,
could see that being hella addictive.
yeah,
Like,
because there's a lot of, you got to boil things down and kind of get past that husk. So you got to, let things in. And I know one of the biggest elements that I always have is if you're playing a character, you have to have a character voice. You can't just be like, oh, Grogar the Barbarian says this. And I'm like, no, I want you to give me Grogar's voice. Because when you're talking like your normal voice, that's you telling me something out of character. When you're talking as your character, I want to hear what Grogar has to say. And the whole logic behind it is yes, it's silly. Yes, their first few times of doing it at a table surrounded by people is going to be like, it's a little silly, isn't it? Using voice. And I'm like, yeah, all of this is silly. None of this isn't silly. But at the end of the day, it's like, you got to get past that. Once you get past that phase and you realize, oh, I'm surrounded by other people who are doing the exact same thing and going through the exact same vulnerability. But you know what? They're doing it. We're all not judging each other. Let's go forward. Let's actually have a good time here.
okay. When did you start getting into it?
When I was a little lad, I'd always loved Lord of the Rings, high fantasy, that sort of stuff. And it was one of the things you kind of always, everybody's heard about D&D, whether you've seen it or not.
Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
we had I started with third edition, and my stepbrother at the time, he had the player's handbook. I scrounged around enough coin to get a set of dice, and then we literally just went, that's all you needed. And we just sat down and he made a campaign and I played. And it was, I think, me, and I think we had to force our two little brothers into it. And they didn't quite get it, but it was like, well, we can't just do me and you. We can't just go
Yeah,
back and
yeah.
forth. We have to have at least some group. And that was it. Like, so basically from age 10 onward, I've played third edition, 3.5, fourth. The current edition is fifth. And I think the reason why there's such a great uptick in players is it's just fifth edition is so easy to teach people. So,
Really?
oh yeah.
So you don't need to learn the original sort of handbook version to understand the fifth one now, or am I
Yeah,
misunderstanding?
Yeah, so you don't need to know 3.5 and 4th edition. They exist as kind of like in my heart of hearts, don't get me wrong, like I just said I love 5th edition for how much it's brought people in. I also will always love 3.5 edition more than any other editions because the amount of customization, the amount of options to you is amazing. But if I were to drop the pile of books that are all part of 3.5 edition in front of you and be like, all right, make a character, as a new player, you would just shut down because it's just, there are too many options in front of you. But 5th edition, I don't want to say that it's simpler, but it is more streamlined. So
Okay.
I have fun playing it, but the guilty pleasure in me will always want to play 3.5 because some of the crazy stuff that you can get into. But I love the books because I love hard, tangible. I can touch it and feel it. I know, like I said before, it's one of those things where the more you get into it, the more you want to put into it, the more you get out of it. You will find a PDF of every 5th edition book on the internet somewhere. And if you don't, you'll find a friend who has a copy and who will lend it to you. It's not, all you need is that and some dice to make a character because you need to roll a d6 a few times. But if you can't do that, you can literally Google roll a d6 and it'll do it for you. So the tools are
Okay.
out there.
That was going to be one of my other questions: is what do you need to start? But you just kind of answered everything. So
All you really need to start is a group of friends. That is it. A group of people who are willing and wanting to play and have a good time. I know a lot of people will say that you need at least a book on hand. Someone else will have a book on hand. Like, you don't need to go all in immediately. Someone will take care of you. All you need is that group of players, one person to say, I'll be the dungeon master. That's kind of a bit of the one grief in the community is that everybody wants to play, and there's that sort of mindset of the forever DM, where it's like once you've agreed to be the dungeon master once, it's kind of expected of you.
yeah,
Because everybody else wants to do the players and dance around in another person's world. It's more exciting if every week when you play, it's like, ooh, I wonder what we're doing today. Rather than the DM who's like, I know exactly what we're doing today.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering how my players will interact with it. I
Couldn't you do like a roll the dice kind of thing at the end of every game? You roll the dice, and each person, whoever gets the highest points, is now the dungeon master for next week.
You could do that. The problem is most people will play a long-term game where you will be like, all right, guys, this week we're doing this, and then next week, but it's all one collective story. I've been playing for almost, oh God, like a year and a half. I've been playing the same campaign. It's the same game, but we just, every week, we take a break and we have a lull for a week. So if someone were to come in and be the dungeon master, it's like, all right, here's all my notes. And it'd be like, by the way, this guy's secretly a bad guy. And this guy, it would kind of take the allure from it. I've got to DM this game until the end. But I think a good way to remedy that is in our group of friends, and he's actually in my chat right now. I have another player who's also a DM. So to keep things fresh for us, every fourth session we play a different campaign that he DMs, and I get to be the player in. That way, we're refreshed. We have a different perspective that we visit. So it's nice to keep things in the air and fresh and rotating. That way, you're not always stuck in the same cycle of the same players and the same dungeon master and over, because that's just going to get stale.
Yeah. See, I tried to set up. Well, I didn't try set up. My girlfriend tried to set up a game between newbies. So like she had some people at work none of us had played it ever or read any of the handbooks or anything like. And she wanted to start up a game so that we wouldn't have anyone's influence on the story. But like in a sense that if you played it a lot before, you kind of have something in your head of what a constant narrative might be, like how it might be made up and all that kind of stuff. But if you're a blank slate, then you might have something completely different if you don't have someone guiding you.
Absolutely.
So she started doing it, and we just found the problem. This is before the pandemic. The problem was no one wanted to actually commit. They would say they're interested, put their names down, like give us their emails even, so that we could then email them and say, look, we're going to start do it remotely. Even before the pandemic, we're going to do it remotely. And they just was like, oh yeah, well, this point and this point, this time and this time don't work for me. And then every rescheduling just didn't work for someone, and it was just like felt like no one was actually fucking interested. They were just interested in saying they were interested. Right? Do you ever get that difficulty where people are sitting there?
Yeah, sometimes people need to be herded. And I don't mean to say that and I don't mean to say that in a bad, demeaning way, but it's just, there are some people when they're like, I've given you my email, please, I leave it all to you. And it's just kind of like, well, that's not very fair, but at the end of the day, I'm going to take that and roll with it. So I'm going to just be like, Thursday, everybody, we're doing Thursday. And if you're not there, tell me. And then, you'll get the people like, well, I have this day. And it's just like, well, we said Thursday 3 days ago, and no one said no. So if you're not there, you're not there, and we're gonna find a time to make it work next time. You kind of gotta push past it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let me get my questions up again. Okay, I'm sort of sure you have answered this a little bit, but it's a succinct question this way. Okay. Can you summarize Dungeons and Dragons in 10 words or less? But I should have given you that one beforehand, really.
I mean, I like it. Collaborative storytelling. Storytelling's one word, right?
Yeah.
Collaborative storytelling, brainstorming, and just trying to have a good time. I did it in 9.
Here we go. It's or less. So yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Sorry, this is the first time I've had a chatter in my chat like stay and ask a question. So I'm just replying.
Go for it. Go for it.
I actually put the title of Dungeons and Dragons instead of just chatting. Hopefully drag some people into.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That'll get them coming. I got someone in my chat talking about murder hobos, and I think that's the second or third time we've talked about that. Murder hobos is a term that comes to label most, like 9 out of 10 D&D groups, because it's not all combat. I know a lot of people will think it's just, hopping on one place to another, getting from combat to combat. But that's not necessarily the case. Your character should do and interact and have other things that it's doing to manipulate and touch the world that the Dungeon Master's created. But typically you will have encounters, and it's just like, all right, you will go to this town and you're going to fight these bad guys, and then you're going to do this in the town. And then you're going to go to the next town, and maybe on your way there, you're going to ride into some orcs. So because of that, once you kind of pan out and look at what a D&D group is, it's just a traveling group of people with no real home who go from one place to one place killing people. So thus the phrase murder hobos.
That's great. That is amazing. Okay, so let's get into a bit more kind of a meaty question related to the topic. So you've mentioned like, oh, there we go. That was the question I wanted to say. Uh, are there any like historical examples of Dungeons and Dragons being used in like a smaller form, rudimentary form, or was there anything that was like a preamble to Dungeons and Dragons
Ooh,
that you know of?
that's a really good question. I know. Oh, I can't ever remember the other guy's name. It's somebody else, and Gary Gygax got together and made it forever ago. It was in the 70s, and it was first edition. The craziest thing about first edition that I can't wrap my head around is that they didn't even have. I know a lot of people know now that D&D is all like you got to have different shaped dice, but that came the need the different shaped dice came because there was a need for that. Because it was like, hey, not everything is a 1 in 6 chance. But back in the day, they didn't have other dice. So it was like, we got to find a way to make a d6 work for everything. And that was kind of funny. But there's not, I think it just comes more from a desire to want to run around and play in other people's worlds, if that makes sense. I know it's a little bit of fun trivia. The people who made D&D were sued by the estate, the Tolkien estate, because basically Dungeons and Dragons was like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we all played in the Lord of the Rings universe? Because that's kind of you have orcs, and they're called halflings now, but they were called hobbits. There were the Trents are now called Ents, and things. No, the Ents are now called Trents. They basically took all of his terms and they were like, all right, yeah, we're just gonna make that. And then his family members were like, no, you can't exactly do that. For some reason, orcs was the only thing that was able to stay because Tolkien did invent orcs. But other than that, it's just kind of well, now that we've read these books, let's kind of have the 4D experience, I guess, of Tolkien. So if anything, I'd say Lord of the Rings is the preamble to Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, someone in my chat just said that Dave Arneson was the co-designer. Is that
That
right?
that sounds right. I am horrible with names, despite Gary Gygax is the one that always stands out to me because it's his last name is Gygax, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how do you forget that?
I was doing a bit of research. I watched like a 5 minute video. I say research, but
That's
and they
research.
mentioned something called chainmail as like a game that came before D&D as its like origin. But
That that wouldn't surprise me. There's tons of, and there still are to this day, tons of different tabletop role playing games. D&D is not does not own a monopoly on that. So if there were other games that came before it, absolutely. I wouldn't. I don't think that they're the end all. Like they weren't the first, but it's just the one that everybody knows.
you mentioned that uh, screw. No, that popped out of my head. That one. that
We'll get it back
was
later.
it was a brain fart. It probably wasn't useful. So why does um why does a character so you said the characters are made by the player,
Ye-
right?
yes.
Is that completely true, or is there any kind of restrictions around their imagination?
There are times when that's not true. It happens a lot with one shots, and those are where it's like, hey guys, this isn't going to be something that lasts for months and months. We're going to play one game, we're going to play it out, and then once that's done, we're never going to play these characters again. Sometimes to make that work more and easier, a DM might just have like, all right, here's 5 pre-made characters that I've created that go with this scenario. Well, pick a number between 1 and 5. That's the one you're gonna get. And then there's also times where, and I've certainly done it, where I've played a campaign and I'm like, hey guys, you can make whatever character you want, just don't do this. I know there was a great example where I forget who it was. It was another DM that I love watching, and they have fuck, who was what was doesn't matter. They were doing a game where it was like a high fantasy sort of. There were these floating islands, and each island was a different kingdom, and you could like use these flying vessels. It was a really fun concept, and to make it work, he was like, all right, you can't pick any character that has a flying speed, because if you do that, you are going to horribly limit, the not the direction of the story. Because if you can just fly to wherever you want to fly, you're going to skip all of the major, cities and the structure that I've created. And everybody's like, yeah, all right, yeah, we won't have any characters that can fly. And first session, it was all people with wings and different flight speeds and stuff like that. It's like, well, now you've ruined the pacing of the game, so oops.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the only restriction that I give is I'll either say, hey, don't do this. And most of the time, that's like, hey, I know what's coming up and I know this isn't going to be fun. If you go this way, you are not going to be able to be used to your best ability. So yeah, don't do that. And then also, don't play an evil character. Comes up a lot because it's just like, this is going to be a good based adventure, or at the very least a neutral adventure. Can't have you just running around mucking it up being evil.
Yeah. So it seems like um so they use the dice to make their characteristics?
Yes. So basically, to get into the real meat of the game, every character has 6 attributes: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And you achieve that by rolling a d6. That's not true. There's several different ways to do it. The way that I do it and the way that a lot of people do it makes it a little bit more fun, but you're going to get characters with higher stats. They're going to be more godlike characters than normal. You roll a d6 either 3 times and take whatever number that is as an attribute. So, like, I'll roll a d6, 4, 5, 6. So I rolled a 15 there. So now I've got 15, and I can just save that, and then I would do that enough times so that I would have 6 numbers, and it would be like, all right, now that I have these numbers, I can put them wherever I want. I can say that the 15 I just got was in charisma, and he's actually a fairly charismatic person because it's on a scale between 1 to 20. And based off of where that number is, above or below 10, determines the modifier for it. For instance, 10 and 11, you just have a +0, which means you have average strength. You're not anything fantastic. So when you roll a d20 to determine if you do something that's strength-based, you're not adding anything to it. However, if you have a 15 strength, that's I think a +2. So now you're adding +2 to it. So it's kind of like, well, is my guy someone who needs strength? Would I put something like that in there? So that's how you would do it. That's how you would do attributes that way. I like to do, when I'm doing the D6s, I actually like to do, and this is more of a homebrew, which means it's not the official thing in the book, but it is the first rule of the book is, while there are tons of rules in here, there are always going to be exceptions to them. I like to roll 4 D6s and get rid of the lowest number. So if you roll like 2 6s, a 3, and a 5, you get rid of the 3, 2 6s and a 5, you actually got a 17. It makes more beefier characters, and since I like high fantasy, that makes sense. Another option that you can have is the point buy system, where it's kind of like, all right, everybody starts at 8, all your attributes start at 8, and you kind of just take 1 point and put it in. Now it's 9, 10. Kind of like when you play Fallout, and if you've ever played Fallout or a video game similar to that, where it's just like, all your attributes start at 1, and you have a collection of attribute points, and then you dish those out and deal those until you have the number that you want. Or even blander than that, what is it? I think it's 8, 10, 12, 14, 14, 15. And everyone just has those numbers, and you can place them indiscriminately where you want to throughout your attributes. And the reason why they do that instead of rolling is because there are a lot of games, going back to that whole game shop scenario where like you might just be playing with strangers in a collaborative, like, hey, we all need someone to play. And someone might come up with a character who has 20 in every attribute, and they're like, I just rolled really well. You can't blame me for that. I just rolled really well. So in a scenario where you don't know everyone, so you don't necessarily trust everyone, you'll do one of those like, all right, everybody, we all have the same attributes. We all have the same numbers for where we can put those, put them to an attribute. So everyone will have the same base starting point. So no one will be above anyone else, and we'll all kind of be in neutral ground.
Kind of reminds me if you ever played the online Pokemon game where I can't remember what it's called, where you pick your own team, you pick their own abilities, you pick all their stats. Like they have a certain cap on the stats, and you choose where they go. So it sounds very similar to that.
Oh yeah,
in that sense.
Yeah, because it even goes beyond just simply picking that, because the race that your character is will also have will also affect your attributes. So for instance, half orcs have +2 to their strength and +1 to your constitution. So there's still even more that's happening. You pick that, you have a background that you can pick, which is kind of like, hey, tell your story before you started in this game. And that's kind of like, oh yeah, you pick a thief, and now you're good at, that means you were good at pickpocketing and things like sleight of hand. So now your character has those abilities as well going from the future, and that's also something you can hearken to while you play the game.
Okay, we've got a little question from my chat. How would you handle the so-called rules lawyer player, aka players that cling to the handbook only and don't allow anything except the official rules?
So, for those of you that don't know, that's a really accurate description of a rules lawyer. They are the type of player who is just kind of like, all right, well, this has happened. You did this, so this is what's happened. A rules lawyer will be like, well, actually, if I'm not mistaken, rules as written will say that this will happen. They are good. I think the best way to handle a character like that or a player like that, if it gets out of hand and it gets disruptive to the point where other people aren't having fun, because if you're not having fun, what's the point? It's time to have a conversation. But I think it is good to utilize them. That way they feel like their knowledge is being used, but only when it's beneficial. Like there will be times I'm not infallible. Like I will forget rules all the time. There are gaps in my knowledge. So it's good sometimes where it's just like, hey, does anybody know how this would play out? Does anyone know this rule exactly? 9 times out of 10, they might have exactly what I'm looking for. But if they have another scenario where they tell me, I don't think that's what happened, I think this is what would happen, I'm just going to look them dead in the eyes. I'm like, well, then when you run your game, when that happens, that's what's going to happen. But in my game, this is what's happening. And as long as, you're never unfairly booning one player, like, I think it's nice to, the rules are just a suggestion. There are tons of times, and it's a magical universe. Will spells and pixies exist? Play with it. Have fun. Like, it doesn't have to be rigid and cold. It's just like, If you want to say that your ice spell has frozen the lake, so now that you can ice skate on it, there is nothing in the rules that says that that's something that can happen. But I'm going to allow it because I want that to happen if that's what something you try to do.
So I've I don't know if you've heard of a streamer called Destiny, but he does mutual D&D campaigns with three other streamers
Mm-hmm.
every so often. And I've watched a bit of it before, but I kind of got lost because I was like I was in the middle of an episode and it was like in the middle of a campaign,
Yeah.
so I didn't know any of the backstory. I don't know how the game was going, so like I was just a bit lost. But I was enjoying watching like how things just pop out of nowhere. That the that bit I'd really enjoy, I think. And I think that bit would. Have you got any like personal experiences where a game was kind of a bit stale, and then suddenly you had a great idea as a dungeon master, and it worked perfectly, and the game just kicked off again, and you lasted longer than you would have if you just.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm just answering one question from my chat. Someone asked, is it possible to start with max stats? And I'm just saying, if someone comes to your game with max stats, tell them to reroll right now in front of you. Or go buy a lottery ticket, because that would mean you'd roll 3 6s 6 times. So statistically,
No,
not happen.
that's almost the dream level
Yeah.
Minecraft run thing.
I think the reason why a lot of times stale gameplay comes in is exactly like you said. If you keep doing the same thing every session, if every solution to every puzzle you have is relatively the same, you're going to hit that sort of staleness, and it is usually really good to come out of left field and be like, oh, wow. But the unexpected, I think, comes from both sides. I play Dungeons and Dragons as a DM because I will make problems that don't have solutions. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, you got to have a solution to your puzzle. And it's just like, no, I don't. If you were an archmage creating a tower that you didn't want anyone to come into, and you wanted to just be your fortress, you're not going to have a solution. You're not going to be like, oh, yeah, absolutely. No one can get in. But if you have these 3 crystals, I'll be completely powerless. No one's going to put themselves in that situation. I like having the players look at it because then they're going to tell me how they think to get past that, which is great because now it's literally me versus them. And it's how are they going to see past me? What gaps have I created that I didn't know about? And they're going to have a more fun time combating that. Like, for instance, one of my players were locked in, it's going to sound really weird, essentially their version of kind of like a Hunger Games-esque game show, where it was just this guy was trapping people of high levels of power and essentially pitting them in a bunch of games that slowly killed them. And he was doing that to a bunch of aristocracy's kind of enjoyment. And I didn't set up there's never going to be a break where that's your time to attack. It's like they were trapped in that scenario and they had to do what they had to do. And there was a sort of bit where this was early on in my campaign. So a lot of the players were like, all right, well, we'll just play this guy's game. And when our moment to strike comes up, that's when we'll do our thing. And they slowly realize there is going to be no moment to strike that he's setting up. We have to find a solution to that. And one of the players had this item that had been bequeathed upon them by a god. Ooh, thank you, Fred. Appreciate the like, bud. It was this boomerang. It was called the Boomerang of Power. He had no idea what it was, but it was just like, hey, if you're ever in trouble, this will help you out. And he was like, yeah, all right. So he just chuck it out and threw it because he was like, I don't know what this does, but we're in a really shitty situation. We're kind of getting to the point where we're going to have to kill each other here. So he just picked it up and chucked it, and it disappeared. And he was like, well, that's not good. And then he heard a screaming in the distance and then a very large explosion. And what the item was it'll find whoever, when you chuck the boomerang, it'll instantly teleport to whoever in your heart of hearts you want destroyed in that moment. And then it does an ungodly amount of damage. He had no idea that's what it was going to do, but he was like, I mean, we're kind of in a sticky situation. And that's, if you can breed moments like that, I think, you don't have to worry about staleness, because as long as you have a good group of players and as long as you give them opportunities to do weird and fun stuff like that, you're always going to have a good time.
It does sound like a really good game. It's gonna. The one thing that put me off originally was the time length. Like, you just don't know how long it's going to go on for, because there's so many decisions to be made and things like that.
It's good to.
Is that true?
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, is that true or not?
I'd say that's one of the things that you have to have. I know there's this thing called the session zero. A lot of people probably will talk about. That's where you're gathering, but you're not gathering to play the game. It's to talk about the game coming up. You're going to tell what your expectations are, any sort of rules, anything they need to know before you play. And one of those things is always like, hey guys, due to this, we're going to have 3-hour sessions. Or, hey, we're not going to play this much, but when we do get together to play, we're going to play for 8 hours. And you got to have that sort of agreement. I think you got to give it some time. Anything less than 2-3 hours, 3 hours at the should be what for me, that's what I want to have at least. But you can do it with 2. But
Especially with new players as
yeah.
well. You're going to take longer to get into it, aren't you? 'Cause they need to learn how it works.
Yeah. I actually love new players for that exact reason, because you'll get a lot more ingenuity and creativity out of new players than you will veterans sometimes, because new players who ask questions will kind of be like, I don't know if I can do this, but can I? And then they'll ask some outrageous thing like, hey, can I get on top of the tower and then jump from the tower with a lance and land on the back of the dragon? Absolutely, let's have that happen. Like, I want to see that occur. And that's kind of why I like having new players around, because veterans will be like, all right, well, let's get into the dragon and fight it. Whereas new players who are curious to the game will kind of find facets to it that some players have kind of missed or grown numb to.
Yeah, I can imagine that. The thing you just described to me really gave me the image of Anchorman 2. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
Where like all of the Anchormen come together and they have
they
a massive fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like the people on top of the building were just going to jump down and stab Will Smith in the head or something.
Oh yeah.
So there was one question from my chat. How do you feel about fridging rolls or stats, as in trying to avoid a TPK or avoid his big, bad, evil guy gets one shot by his party?
So the BBEG, Big Bad Evil Guy, that's usually like, that's D&D lingo for main antagonist. I fudge die rolls, but I will never, ever, ever tell my players that. I have a DM screen, which is to hide notes and it's to hide my rolls so that they can't see them. Most players will have that. If it's very important, sometimes I'll do it in front of this screen so that everybody can see it and we'll have like a moment. But you add an element of chaos to the universe. That's what the dice are. The dice are the universe. You're trying to have this sort of, hey, yeah, your character might be good at everything, but sometimes you're going to have a bad day. And that's what the D20 is. But there are just some times when it's just this guy's got 4 attacks and every single one of them were a critical hit, and it's just kind of like, that's statistically impossible, and all that's going to do is make my players have a horrible time. There's going to be a crit for sure, and I want them to be, hurt, but I don't want them to be like, look, this is terrible. But at the same time, you do have to hold those stakes, and you do have to be like, all right, that's a tool I'm going to use once or twice. I'm not going to do it all the time, and it's usually, I'll inverse of that, and I know I might get some hate for this. If I roll and I don't get any attacks, I'm going to say that 1 or 2 of them hit. Like I'm going to make up a higher number, because if they're going to one shot the bad guy because they rolled really well, or I want that. If they end up overpowering the big bad evil guy, good on them. But inversely, I don't want them to be hit by sponges. I want them to have an experience. If I'm rolling low so bad, like, 2, I'm rolling a 3, I'm rolling a 4. If you got into a fight, as fun as it is to like, I didn't even get hit once. But if you go and you fight this giant iron golem that's 3 times the size of you and nobody gets hit once that entire combat, you're kind of going to get let down a little bit. So I want my players to bleed a little bit. So, if he's not rolling well, I'm going to be like, yeah, this one did hit. Sorry.
Yeah, well, you kind of need the game to go somewhere, don't you?
Yeah. Thank you for the follow, Dennis. Appreciate you. But but you can't do that all the time. If I did that to every single roll, now we're getting to the point where, like, hey man, if I wanted to be completely in control of the story, I should just be writing a book. I shouldn't be playing Dungeons and Dragons. I want them to influencing the world just as much as I do. So I don't do it all the time. Just a little bit here and there to make sure, to go back on what you said earlier, to make sure that my players are having a good time too, is essentially what I'm doing. I hate making that call for other people, but at the same time, they can't see it and I do, and I want to make sure they have a fun time.
See, this is weird, but it's reminding me. I was watching like a debate between like a Christian and an agnostic yesterday, and the Christian made an argument for God that was like, quantum physics necessitates a God for it to work. And it's almost like the dungeon master is God, the dice is quantum physics, and the game is the world.
What's that saying? Your first gulp of science will put atheism on your lips, but at the end of the glass you'll find God, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the mindset. That's a very good interpretation of it. It's very much a sort of, I have a plan, I have an idea, I have a construct of where I want to go, but we're going to roll these things and we're going to see if that happens.
Yeah. Camera's playing up. Keeps zooming in and out. So I wanted to move on to sort of how Dungeons and Dragons is affected by the outside world in a way. Like, so how does the media or current events or like recent controversy, how does that affect the people playing the game and the game itself?
Ooh. Thank you for the follow, Tommy. There are constantly things happening in D&D or in the outside world where it's just kind of, hey, let's co-opt that and make a D&D game of that. I know a lot of, when Doom came out, the Doom video game, there was a bunch of people who was like, hey, let's make a Doom video game D&D kind of hybrid thing. So because of that, D&D acts as kind of a format for play, and you can wrap that format around other things and kind of play like that. But inversely, outside world affecting it. Sometimes negative things occur, bad things happen in people's life, and now you've got to put some things on hold or move some things around. I once had a character who I was going to have their player character, their parents were going to get killed by the big bad evil guy at some point, and that was kind of be a drive and a motivation for them. And that was something I had planned. Prior to that happening, that character's father actually passed away in real life. And now it's just like, well, I can't do that anymore. The week after your father's died, when you're finally ready to come back and play the game, I can't be like, well, your parents have died in the fantasy world we've created as well. Sorry, Gary, but we're going to move on now. You got to have tact and smart and handle things. I know there's a big issue right now in D&D of making sure you create a safe environment for your players, and that's kind of the first step is just kind of being a smart, caring, empathic human being, where it's just kind of like, yeah, don't put someone in a scenario that's uncomfortable because of things like that.
Yeah, see, I'm really into Star Wars myself, and I've obviously noticed I can't remember her name, but she just got fired from The Mandalorian for her silly tweet.
Yeah, Cara Dune's character.
That's the one. Yeah. So, is there anything like that? There any kind of like controversies around the media that's hyped up, or anything like that? Just because I did see something about. No, carry on. I forgot what I was going to say.
The biggest thing that I can remember. There's something actually that happened relatively recently, and that was someone who was wheelchair bound had designed a D&D combat wheelchair, and that was like, hey, this is your, if your character is disabled, like this is a construct that you can bring into your D&D game, and it'll justify your character being able to move and do all the other things as the other player. And there were a lot of people who, on the one hand, were like, oh, yay, that's good. Now we have like something for people who are disabled. And then the other side of the argument was, why would anyone ever be disabled in this universe? Like, not to be, ableist or disablest, but it's just like, there are literally spells designed to correct whatever issue. Cure Wounds, which is like one of the most used healing spells, literally describes it as healing up broken bone. Greater Restoration would fix things that are internally damaged within you. So it was one of those, there was a big to-do, on Twitter and everything like that, where everybody was just like, yeah, combat wheelchair, let everybody have their turn. And then everybody else was just like, yeah,
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like it's cool that everybody's got their, but at the same time, it's just like, it doesn't make sense. Exactly, you're right.
See, I'm a healthcare worker in a brain injury and rehab center.
Mm-hmm.
So I had preconceptions of sort of disabled people because of the media. Going into that job, but Jesus Christ, the brick wall that just got smashed for me was incredible, because like there are some people that are disabled that are just as much of a good person as anyone else, and vice versa on the other side. So it really does. Experience is the best for it. So I get the idea to try and make it accessible to people who may not find it accessible, but it's a board game that you can sit on a table next to someone who's in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like it's not
to harken back on what we were saying earlier about escapism, but if you were in a wheelchair, why would you play a character where you were in a wheelchair? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, I will not want to, I don't have that disability, so I can't say anything from the mindset. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, I don't, that seems kind of forcing it. That just seems like you're just focusing on one element of yourself, and that kind of defeats what the game is. It's like I want to play characters who are further and further away from myself so that I can learn more about myself and improve myself as a person. If I'm playing just me without a beard, that's not doing myself a justice, a service, or those around me a service either.
Yeah, it kind of limits it shows yeah, it limits what you can and can't do within the world. So why would you? It's like me choosing to be a character that has no ability to use any spells. It would that would limit me, wouldn't it?
It's funny that you say that, though, because there are, in fact, many player characters that don't have spells. But to be fair, they have things that they can do that spellcasters cannot. So,
It's different types of characters here.
mm-hmm.
Um, so what are the politics like surrounding? I'm really into politics. So
No worries.
what is
Me
it?
too.
What's it like around Dungeons and Dragons? Because obviously, like with Star Wars, you've got the anti SJWs and all that crowd, and then you've got the people who are making the films now for Disney that are kind of saying, why don't we just open up the floor to anyone who can actually do the job? And that seems fairer to me, but like that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is there any kind of political tension?
I said earlier that D&D is a format more than it is a game itself. Because of that, there are tons and tons and tons of opportunities for people out there to write their own book and module and make their own campaign. There are rules that you have to follow because there are certain iconographies and verbiages and wordings that if you use Wizards of the Coast, which is the people that make D&D, might sue you and come after you. But as long as you're smart about it, it's designed for like that sort of thing. It's designed for not everybody who makes a D&D game for you to play is going to be the same people. It's not everything's going to come from Wizards of the Coast. You can find tons of people out there. You can find Kickstarters even now where it's just like, hey, we're trying to make this D&D module. We just need this money to do it. And that's kind of always been the point of tabletop role-playing games is if you find a game and a system that you like, it's all about taking that and running with it. I mean, if you wanted to, I could put Dungeons and Dragons into a Star Wars scenario, and it's not gonna be hard to do. It's not gonna be something that it will require too much change because now instead of saying the Force, all you got to do is say magic. How are you traveling through space? Magic. It's easy.
Yeah, you don't need the midi-chlorians.
Yeah. Never have midichlorians.
Oh, you're on that side of it.
Well, the thing that I don't like about it, and I mean, we could talk Star Wars all day, but the reason that I ultimately will have a problem with the Force is because throughout the 3 trilogies, they had 3 different explanations of how the Force was what it was. Originally it is this magic force that everyone has that some are more akin to, and it's just an elemental force in the universe that you are harmonious with. In the prequel trilogies, it's space bugs, and the more space bugs you have, the stronger you are. And then in the final one, it's like, no, the Force is a living entity that can choose to influence other people more than others, and it increases in strength based on the balance of the Force. And it's just kind of like, I know it's all make-believe, and I know it's not real, but you have to have a solid
consistency.
foundation. You have to have a foundation, because if you don't have a foundation, you can't build off of it.
So I think they are all linked. Like, so you've got a source, like a battery, the midi
Hmm.
chlorine, but it is a cell in a person's body, right? And to me, it seems like the Higgs boson. Like, it's a
Okay.
field that everyone walks through, and depending on the amount of cells you have, the concentration depends on how well you can bend and use that field.
That makes sense.
And that's the only way I could. That's the only way I could connect them all together. um, but now that you point out the drastic difference between the definitions of the force, I never thought about it because I grew up with the first Star Wars I ever watched was Episode One,
Oh,
was the Phantom
wow.
Menace,
Yeah.
and I literally went through all the way through chronologically, thinking it was chronological because I was young. I didn't know that, like, and I was young enough to not really care that the technology was clearly different.
I mean,
Like,
at that time, you probably would have been hitting the re-releases of 4, 5, and 6, anyways, where they touched it up with the modern day CGI. So I know exactly what you're talking about, because I grew up off of I never saw the original cuts of 4, 5, and 6 until I was much uh, older. I had always grown up on the VHSs of the remastered edition.
yeah,
Hold on,
it
sorry.
was.
I got one of my cats is attacking me through the door. I'll be right back.
Go on. For the little. So I can't actually see um, his chat at the minute. I can't even open it because my internet is very temperamental today. Let's give it a try. Uh, just want to see if anyone's got any questions for me or anything. You can always drop them in the chat and he'll ask me, or if you have any points that you want to bring up, uh, I'm more than happy to play along with them. Pretty open book, really. Um,
I apologize. Sorry
you're
about
back.
that.
That's all right. I have a dog as well. I think you might have heard the bark in the background.
Oh, no.
Um, oh no, that's good. That means my compressor and everything is working right on the mic.
Nice.
Um, cool. um, okay, so where was I? Where was I? Let's get back to it. Okay, so we were talking about the politics surrounding it, and you sort of answered that already. With the you actually preempted one of my other questions because I was like, "Well, I really like Star Wars. Is there an example of Star Wars D&D?" And you're like, "Yeah, you could just make it."
Well, not only that, but it's not exactly Star Wars, but they created a tabletop role playing game in the 90s. I think they've done a better version of it, but yeah, they already did that. They beat you to the punch.
That makes me feel less intelligent.
No, no, no.
No, I'm joking.
It's just one of those things where if there's ever a media where you're like, ooh, I wonder if they made a tabletop role playing game for that, someone has.
I mean,
Someone looking for an opportunity absolutely has. And it was actually funny because from what I've heard, it got better. I played it the first iteration of it, and the real big problem was I'm sure you can imagine, all the different, you've got Jedi Knights, Jedi Counselors, Force Adepts, Bounty Hunters, smugglers, and politicians. I imagine you can see the problem here.
Yeah,
Everyone played as a Jedi Knight. Every game ever. It's just like, all right, guys, this is the game we're doing. What do we do? You might have one person who'd be like, oh, I'm going to play a scoundrel. Everyone else is showing up as a Jedi Knight. And justifiably, too, they were the best class. And it wasn't a very good balanced game. And when there's one class that's superior to every other class, and you'd be like, well, I'd be a dummy not to play it, you've made a bad game.
yeah. Got another question from the chat. Have you? It kind of relates back to what you said about choosing to use a voice
Mm-hmm.
during the game, but have you ever experienced the Matt Mercer effect, aka where players demand you to be the DM, like Critical Role, and act like a professional voice actor?
I love making funny voices, so I will always do funny voices where I can. Um, and I think most people will experience just kind of like, hey, even if my voice is, because I have a bad problem where I'll like kind of get stuck on one accent or one dialect, and it's just like, well, sorry, everyone I make tonight is probably going to end up British for some reason, or someone everybody I play tonight, you get in those kind of funks sometimes. But I've never had anybody uh, have that sort of issue. The biggest effect that I've had regarding the Matt Mercer effect is a lot of people will just openly compare their game of Dungeons and Dragons to the Critical Role campaign. And that's problematic because if you're a player, that's kind of like, hey, I don't care what you as the DM have to think or do or present to us. What I want is just Matt Mercer, so give me some of that. And as a DM, that's unfair because you're not giving the players a unique experience that if they wanted Critical Role, they can watch it every Thursday. Don't give them that. Give them something that you've come up with, or at the very least, there was a big problem in the campaign that I currently am running. We had a player who's no longer playing, and it was just one of those things where it's just like every kind of interaction, it was just like, are you trying to be one of the characters from Critical Role? Because it really seems like you're trying to be Ford the Warlock, and I don't want to play with Ford the Warlock. I want to play with who you want to play as. If that's Ford the Warlock, that's fine, but put your own spin on it. Let's not copy other people's thing, because you're not really, that defeats the purpose.
Okay. So, what is Critical Role?
Critical Role is one of the bigger streaming games. It is full of. This is also why one of the reasons why you shouldn't hold yourself as a standard to it. The entire cast is nothing but voice actors nerdy voice actors who have gotten together to play games. So not only that, they've been friends for years. They are professionals, and they're now getting paid to do it. They have a writing staff. So the game's beautiful. It's beautifully done. It's got a great production value. It's done by professionals who know what they're doing and have played forever. And it's just like, yeah, it's very, very good, and it's great D&D, but at the end of the day, it's like he's got a writing staff, and that's his job. You're probably a guy who's got a 9 to 5, working 40 hours a week and trying to play with your friends. You are gonna come up with a different product, and that's okay.
Yeah, but that's part of the game, though, isn't it? Is to make it yours.
Exactly.
So to try and, unless you're going to try and like play in some way, play along. So like have your own game running at the same time as theirs and see how it goes. And but that might be complicated.
that wouldn't exactly work because if you're playing, if you're watching Critical Role, like to simplify it, let's say they go left in a dungeon and your players go right. You don't know what was right. You don't know what was on the right
But yeah,
thing. So,
yeah,
so you
yeah,
might
yeah,
come out a
yeah,
completely different area. So what they're doing next week is going to be completely different to
yeah,
where you even end up.
yeah. You can't even. Yeah, you'd have to have the DM involved.
You
You
would you would
just wouldn't be able to
literally
do it.
play their game over again, and it's just like,
Yeah, what's the point?
what?
Like,
Just watch a rerun, man.
yeah. Um. So I was wondering, like, when you first started doing it online, was it a bit more? Um. What's the word? Was it a bit more free than it is now? Because a lot of people say that the internet has changed in a sense that it's more regulated, but is there like Twitch, for example, the
Hmm.
TOS changes over years.
Yeah.
And apparently Twitch used to be incredibly free when it first started. And I had no idea about that until recently. But is that the same with D&D online? Like there was a bit more of a free for all, and then things started to work out where people were like, "Well, I don't really want to play with people that are going to throw the N word around." So, like, is there any restrictions around that?
To kind of harken back on what you said earlier about your biggest problem setting up was that everybody wanted to give you their email, but no one wanted to play. It's a lot easier online to be like, "Hey, everybody good for 6:30 on Tuesday?" Because now you don't have to get in your car, you don't have to drive. You can just wear your pajamas and open up a computer screen.
Yeah, yeah,
So, it's made it more relaxed in the fashion where it's easier to get scheduling. But inversely, there are some negative things that if you're playing with randoms, you might experience exactly what you said. I don't want to play with a guy who's, throwing around expletives or is derogatory or elitist or anything like that. And then on top of that, there's a lot of. I like minimalism when it comes to using a platform to play online. We'd pretty much do exactly what we're doing right now. We'd have a video call or just voice if you're more comfortable with that. I'm going to explain everything. You guys talk to me, tell me what you're doing. If we go into combat, I'll set up a board with another camera, and then we'll watch that. There's a lot of cool things online where you can be like, hey, yeah, using the tools that this website has, you can build a virtual tavern that's kind of, has clickable things and stuff. But the problem is once you've done that, it looks cool. But instead of your characters going like, I look around and see what looks suspicious, they're just going to start clicking everywhere on the screen until they find what's clickable, and then they'll play that way. And it's like, I don't want you to do that. I want you to be engaged mentally. I don't want you to find the secret because you clicked enough times.
yeah. It kind of reminds me of. Have you ever done anything called e-learning? Like you've got a job and they have like things you've got to learn for the job,
Yeah.
and they put it on the computer for you.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that. Like we've got that at my place where people just um, go through the questions enough times to find out the right answers.
Oh, 100%. If
And
if you can
like,
just go through it over and over and over again with no
yeah,
problems, I'm like, you'll eventually get 100%.
yeah. Well, you might think that, but there are some people that just like,
Yeah, that is definitely the case as well.
that literally shake next to a computer because they're so worried that they might break it if they touch it. And I was like, to start with, that's a big ego because like you don't know what you're doing and you already think you're going to break it by touching one key.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's like, um, which I ended up sort of helping her with it, and she's all right with it now. She just the password. Everyone loses their password all the time, and if they don't use computers all the time, like I've got one of those apps on my phone that like holds everything.
Hmm.
Um, it works so well, and I convinced her to do it, but it just Um, she just deleted it after a while. She's got a shit phone, so it doesn't have much memory.
Yeah, I have
Um,
Google set up for that. It just saves all my passwords for me, and everybody's like, That's not good. They've got all your passwords." I'm like, "It's Google. They've got everything already. Like if
yeah,
they if they want my passwords, they already have what's behind my passwords. So who cares?"
yeah. Um, so what's the weirdest campaign you've had that you think of?
Oh,
Like one where you just really you felt just weird after it. You're like, I did not see that coming, and I don't know if I'm happy or upset about it. It's just weird.
uh, like in a good way or a bad way?
Well, that's what I mean. Do you never get that feeling where you're like, I'm not sure if I'm kind of confused about the feeling about it. Like it's a weird. I feel weird about it in a negative way, I guess. Yeah.
I I like when things are handled in a way that wasn't expressly or exclusively how it was viewed to be solved. I like out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
So I enjoy when those sorts of things occurred. I have had tons of games though where I've gone in and I've left and it's just sort of, oh, what was that? And nine
Yeah.
times out of 10, if that was the case, it's because usually it's a power fantasy thing for the dungeon master. It's just kind of like I am the all powerful god, and they kind of handle it that way.
Yeah.
You usually, if someone does something like that, you're gonna find a game where it's just kind of like, no, no, that's not what There's a lot of times where, and it's a horrible way to DM, but it's just like you'll say that your character will do something, and I've had dungeon masters go, "I was like, I don't think that fits your character. You didn't do that," and I'm like, "No, but I did." No, or even worse, I've had people explain that they've done something and thought of this really cool, well thought out character element or action or something of that regards, and they've done it in game, and their dungeon master says that's really cool, but I think it'd be cooler if that person did it instead. So all that work you just did, we're gonna say this character did it. And that's kind of one of those things where it's just like, yeah, that power fantasy for a dungeon master is kind of gonna ruin that. That's the only time I've really had a negative sort of feeling of, well, that didn't go the way I wanted. Other than that, I like leaving and talking about how crazy things got. We have kind of a little 30-minute to an hour sort of wrap sesh when we're done with our sessions in our current campaign, and we'll usually either play some like Mario Party or like a Jackbox game, and we'll just kind of talk. And some of the best conversations we have come from games where for instance, like I said, when that guy chucked the boomerang of power, and it was just like, yeah, that's not anything that I saw. In our recent session that we had, they were going to go to this wizard's tower, and it's basically imagine college but for wizards. It's kind of like you don't have to go, but like all the really cool wizards, the smart wizards go, and then
Yeah.
they become teachers eventually, and it's just kind of this place for higher learning of wizardry, and it's supposed to be like you can't get into a certain school of magic until you pass their tests. And they were all excited and amped and like, all right, let's do this. And I had created all the puzzles for them, which took a while because it's 8 different puzzles, and we're like, all right, let's go. And at the beginning of that session, they would talk to another NPC that had given them an idea to check up on another NPC. And they were like, hey, hold on, we have a kind of golden opportunity here to kind of visit them and pull on this thread instead and experience this storyline. And the next thing you know, they were right in front of a very important character who they weren't even supposed to meet yet. And it was just kind of like, well, I had prepped for you guys going to the wizard tower and spending a day with wizards and fighting against, magical effects, but no, instead we'll do this mystery solving instead. And I like that because I like
You
the
have to be
play.
Scooby in the gang.
Yeah, exactly. The players don't know what they're coming up to. They don't know what's happening tomorrow within the game world, and I like when the players do stuff like that because then neither do I.
So, do you prefer to be the DM than the player?
I love DMing, but that doesn't mean I don't love playing.
Yeah,
But I'm very happy DMing more than I get to play. As long as I get to play every once in a while, kind of scratch that itch. And I
yeah,
also like doing it because I like seeing other people explore kind of dungeon mastering. And when I get to play, that gives other people who I'm normally just playing with the opportunity to take the role of the leader and run with it. And I like seeing that happen for people. Uh, but I have a lot of ideas all the time, and I have a very active imagination. So because of that, I got to have an outlet for it somewhere. So
yeah.
I loved it. I love DMing.
That's why I ended up doing music production and started doing artwork on Procreate on the iPad because it just you don't realize that you need it before you start doing it, and then the world is open all of a sudden. Like when you first discovered D&D, it must have been like, oh my god, this is what I've needed. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
'cause-
It doesn't just have to happen up here. It can
yeah,
also happen somewhere. It's like discovering you're really good at painting. It's like, oh, I didn't know I was even remotely good at painting, but now that I know I'm good at painting, that's opening up like a whole world for you.
yeah, definitely. With art, I was always kind of not. I found it really difficult to get my ideas onto paper. But with Procreate, it kind of it changes the way you put your ideas onto paper.
Okay.
And so instead of having to master a single tool, you've got like multiple tools to use at once, and you can figure out how to put them together without having to actually master them, which
That
is,
sounds a lot easy, a lot more convenient.
yeah, it is. And there's things that you just physically would never be able to do in the real world. Like if you want to draw a straight line without a ruler, you can just hold down on the screen once you draw a line and it'll pop into a straight line. And the same with a curved line. And you can make like backgrounds as pens. Like I've got a setting for my pen where I just tap and it's just a flower. It's just a pre-made flower. And it's like that seems too cheaty for me. I don't like using that. But it's nice to have like a reference to be like, well, that's a perfect one. So I'm going to start with this. In a sense, like it kind of reminds me of like Critical Role. If you wanted to learn about D&D, it would be a good idea to maybe watch
Yeah,
the start of
absolutely.
a campaign from Critical Role, and then you could get the gist of it from the start. Whereas if I was to watch, say, I don't know, I don't know anyone else that does it apart from Destiny. So if I was to watch his from the start, I might still not get it because it's not quite. It's tailored and made specifically for those people. Um,
The more you consume, the more it the different perspectives you get. It's just like anything. Like painting isn't just painting. Writing isn't just writing. It was just like
yeah,
Dickens is different than Tolkien. Van Gogh's different than Rembrandt. If you only ever see just one painting, that's just one thing. But one person's game is going to be completely different than another person's game.
yeah. Um, okay. Well, my dog is giving me the eye for food. Let me just. How long have we been going?
An
Actually,
hour and a
um,
half.
hour and a half. Let's give it another half an hour of just chat about anything rather than just D&D.
Sure.
Because you mentioned you're into politics and stuff. So, are you from America, by the way?
Yeah, I'm American. live in Florida.
No. Oh, cool. Is so I looked at your Twitter a little bit just to make sure I wanted to get a little bit of
Yeah,
info.
not somebody mad, raving
Yeah,
loony kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. And I noticed there was like the inclusion tweet. I think it's a pinned tweet actually. Um, where is it? I had it. I had it up before it started going slow. So, um, the it's ancestry and culture. Um, is that just a different type of D&D? Is it the ancestry and culture?
I don't know what tweet you're talking about. Give me one
It's
second.
the pinned tweet. It's says it changes race. It addresses racism in the game, and the ancestry and culture an alternative to race in 5e.
I don't. It might.
Ah,
It might be something else that. Let me see. I mean, I'll talk about that. Great. I don't.
unless I'm
That
looking at the wrong person's Twitter.
you might be looking at the wrong person's Twitter,
Is
but
it Arcanist Press?
nope. The Arcanist
Ah,
Owl is mine. But luckily, I turned out not to be a madman, anyways.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But what was your question? I'll gladly answer it.
So the weird thing is, it's a D&D. Is Arcanist something related to D&D?
Arcanist is just kind of like a blanket term for kind of someone who just studies the arcane. So like wizard, mage, sorcerer, that kind of, it's all the same phrase.
Okay, so my
Synonyms.
question really was, what, um, why would D&D need to address racism? Like, why would that need to be a thing in the first place?
There is, it goes kind of multiple routes. It's a bummer that like, oh, there's multiple ways you can be racist in D&D. Um,
Yeah,
it one big problem is a lot of people using the same voice for bad guys. If I were to make every bad guy
I can imagine.
German or Russian, which, movies did for a long time and no one seemed to care about, but like, that might be seen as a negative for a lot of people. I know a lot
Yeah,
of you also have the idea of exclusion, like, oh, why aren't there X amount of this type of character or this character in your campaign? Um, but also the nitty gritty of it is we're playing a game where what race you play actively determines benefits you play around with, which kind of debates the
oh,
real life argument of, well, no, everybody's the same. And I'm like, well, in D&D, if you play as a tiefling, you have fire resistance, whereas if you play as a human, you start with an extra feat. And it's just, there is this kind of separation, and also there's a large amount of game elements that revolve around racism as well, like half orcs, goblins, things that you imagine not even with the perspective of a D&D player, but those races you'd kind of imagine would be lesser than rather elves, who are usually viewed as higher. Like you've seen Lord of the Rings, I imagine.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
the high elves are grand and wearing flowing robes, and their city's beautiful. And the dwarfs are mountain people, and it's just kind of like they don't like each other at all, and they butt heads. Dwarves and orcs have had racial conflicts and wars between them, so they don't like each other. So if you follow the actual D&D storyline and the meta, there is room for basically already ingrained story elements of racism. So
It's that's a that I can see how people can make that point, but like, isn't that the whole purpose of the game? Like, is to have
exactly,
differences in the first place.
exactly,
So, if, and even in life, even though we are treated equally, like I'm treating you fairly, we do have differences. Otherwise, we would be the same person.
exactly. It's
So,
about finding
go on.
the right way to do things. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So getting off the back of that, so what's your what are your politics like? What do you lean towards?
I mean, if I gotta call myself something, I'd go libertarian.
Uh-uh.
I think
Libertarian, right or left?
I guess right. I'm against factionalism as a whole, because the more we put ourselves in these clubs of I'm this and you're that, you're just driving more and more of a wedge between yourself, because politics nowadays isn't about compromise and doing what's best for the people of the government. It's done for, hey, my side won this one, and that's not good for anybody. You want a good compromise. You want.
Well, that's something that I've seen a lot of online. Is like there's a book called "Politics is for Power," um, and it makes the point that the national level politics is somewhat irrelevant in comparison to local, because your ability to express power is in relation to the amount of people that are with you to do that thing that you're trying to do.
I,
Um, go on.
no, go ahead. Sorry, sorry.
So the the way that I view it online is people have taken the name of the book and applied it to their team and said the only way that the world is ever going to get better is if my team has power.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that's not how conversations work well. So how can we build a society that way? Is usually my point. It's like if I have to, like, I had a conversation the other day with I was in a Twitch chat where I was honestly trying to learn about why this particular person said that they don't like any. They said they don't care about the feelings of white people, and I was just like, look, I get where you're coming from, but why do you expect anyone to do anything with you or for you if you don't treat them with respect in the first place? And they did respond with, well, I haven't been treated with respect by white people, so why should I give it to them? And I was just like, I get it. That's why I said I get where you're coming from. But if you actually want to change your living situation, you're not going to do it alone by being aggressive towards everyone that is not part of your group. And I just kept getting all this rhetoric back that was just like, you're coming from a privileged position, therefore your opinion does not matter. And I was just like, again, you're doing the same thing. Your rhetoric is just pushing me away. Do you want more alt writers, or do you want more people on your side to help you gain like a decent living situation? And it was just that constant, I don't want to have to listen to your words because you're white kind of thing. And I was just like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, I'm trying to learn. Like,
That's the biggest problem everybody has, and I've talked about that myself. It's just like the more conversations like that, the more that's just gonna breed racism from both sides.
yeah,
If you don't listen to me, I'm not gonna listen to you, and if you do this, we're gonna do this, and then you hate me for doing that, and it's just the best thing that you can do for your own life is stop looking at everyone else's life from their perspective and just you live your life from yours. You'll find that typically, as long as you're not an asshole to people, they won't be an asshole to you. And that's kind of my element to my take on it. Uh, to go back to the whole power thing, it's like, oh, this is, the best for my side, and it's just you absolutely can't do that. You have to. They're the individual themselves is never going to be purely one thing.
yeah,
Like, look at politics nowadays. Look at look at the conversation that, we took to get to like you asking about my political views. It's like, are you libertarian, left or right? And it's just like
Yeah,
there's so many compartments that we put ourselves in where it's just kind of like, hey, let's just assume that we're people and you can
yeah.
talk and you'll find out what, like, not to be unfair, but racists on both sides tend to sound the same, and you can kind of inherently tell who's going to be one just from your conversation leading up to it. Like if you're sprouting more rhetoric and lines and verbiage instead of your own individual thoughts, you're probably going to be stuck and trapped in something like that, and it's not going to be healthy or good for you.
That's why my YouTube is a collection of everything from the farthest right to the farthest left and everything in between, just so that I know what everyone's saying. Like you know how people say like if you bring up what was it, CNBC or no, MSNBC and Fox News or like Newsmax,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll get the same thing happening, but done in two completely different ways.
Well,
It's
that's
not.
yeah. Yeah, that's because we decided that politics should be in the news, which is horrible, but
Luckily, in Britain, this sounds.
it's
This
state
is
ran.
so one of it's we've got the BBC, but then we've also got the private sector having their own thing. But the private sector is literally owned by Rupert Murdoch, so we it's not really a choice. It's just slightly to the left or slightly to the right. There's nothing like legitimate about it.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, because what was I going to say? So there was what was I saying? Fuck, my brain fart again.
To harp while you're thinking of it, to harp on what you were saying about you got to get from the left and from the right. I mean, you wouldn't eat just vegetables. You wouldn't eat
Yeah,
just steak. Why would you ever just take in
I don't know
one?
if you've watched any Jordan Peterson, you'll find out that if you
the you, the biggest problem that I think most of our problems over here have spurred from the fact that I can't just find the news. I can't just find something that's happened. I have to find out why it's someone else's fault. And we're at a phase where we were told as children that blaming doesn't really accomplish anything, but now in a grand scheme of things, we as adults are like, well, as long as it's not our fault and it's someone else's and it's usually someone I don't agree with, we're fantastic. And that's not a conclusion that will ever
yeah, it's
everyone who's made positive change in the world has done so by accepting other people's opinions.
yeah, it's not you. It's very confusing. Like, so I remembered what I was going to say actually. So the BBC are the state-run enterprise. One of my favorite things that they ever did was interview Ben Shapiro.
Oh, when he broke down Ben Shapiro and wanted
Uh,
to have an argument with him instead? I love
it
that
was
video.
it was beautiful. Like Shapiro just at the time, I was kind of more of a supporter at the time, and then that interview just made me realize how kind of politically bankrupt he is because he's
Oh,
just like
absolutely.
he, he's literally the definition of a grifter.
Yeah.
He's like,
He can talk sexily, but it doesn't mean what he's saying is of any use or value. And that's why a lot of, people will be like, ooh, I like what he says. He says the things I'm thinking sometimes. And it's just like, yeah, that's good, but he does not want to have good, like, he just wants to argue. He wants to, to go on what you were saying about him being morally bankrupt. I watched a horrible video of him rating U.S. presidents on like that kind of S A B C D F kind of thing,
yeah,
and he just had awful, horrible opinions. He put FDR as like an F and put Donald Trump as a B. He put Donald Trump above John Kennedy, and it's just kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, there are
he probably sees the Green New Deal as an extent. Well, it is. Like it's an extension of FDR's original plan. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
so he sees that as a direct threat to to
Socialism bad.
yeah. I mean,
There are some things, as a libertarian, even, there are some things I agree that, the state needs to take care of. I shouldn't have to pick up the phone and call the hospital and have to worry. I don't ever worry when I dial 911. A cop always shows up. I don't have to pay for that. Someone will come and put out a fire. I don't have to pay for that. But, healthcare I've got to pay for. I've got to pay for the ambulance. That doesn't make sense. And that should be something that's taken care of. The news should I know people will freak out. Ooh, the news, they're going to know, you don't want them telling you. Why? We allow a capitalist kind of news agency, and who's paying for that? Well, they're doing the same thing. Those, the people on the right are giving money to those on the right. So it is essentially, we're just getting spoon fed, our political agendas news. Anyways, it's not something to be frowned upon to have something state run. I know people like to slap socialism, communism, and don't you want the power taken care of by a universal overseeing power? Not like, I don't want to get electricity from somebody who can charge me whatever they want because I have it. Like, there are people in Texas who their power companies decided to just jack up how much the cost of per kilowatt hour just to take advantage of people. But if the state took care of your power, like it was, probably that shouldn't happen. But then, of course, but what if a dictator is elected? Well, don't
that's
elect
not
a
an
dictator.
answer.
Yeah, exactly. Don't elect a
Like,
dictator then.
if so, the thing that I was going to talk about the BBC is that it's quite an interesting example of the usefulness, but also the technical difficulties of having a state-run news system, because you're always going to have the antagonism from the right to get rid of it. So at any point, um, for instance, the BBC right now, they're debating in the House of Commons a few months ago, I think it was, whether or not to make the BBC a global subscription service like Netflix, rather than having it as paid for by us, the taxpayer. But then if you're outside of the UK, you can get it for free. So everyone who is the taxpayer is paying for the global content of the BBC.
That makes sense.
So there's not really a definitive right or left position on that situation, because while I want it to be state run, I don't use it. So I don't see why I should have to pay for someone in Germany to use what I don't use.
That makes sense. I get a lot of news from the BBC. I use BBC all the time, and I don't pay for it. So that's a very good point. And there's not an easy answer to it.
So it's interesting because there's new splits in the political parties that didn't really exist before. Maybe Trump, maybe a bit before that, where we've had like what I would consider traditional, not traditional, but that's probably the wrong word. Um, Laissez-faire kind of esque people on the right in our government, pushing austerity, pushing cuts in every sector, and justifying it by saying it's paying off the debt when they weren't actually paying off the debt. And that has caused, now that they're gone, we now have Boris Johnson, which is more of a what we used to call it's something called a one nation conservative, which Maggie Thatcher used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which effectively that just means that you hold the nation above capitalism. So you could make justifications for publicly run systems without being antagonistic to your principles. But the way it comes out is always, well, the minorities are the ones that don't get what I want to give to the country, or the way that they implement it harms minorities. Maybe it's not their intention. That's maybe a misreading, but the way it, like the Equality Act is a great example. It was brought about by Theresa May, and I believe it's Theresa May anyway. Um, and what happened with that? The only way I found out about this was because of my job, but the other identities, bar disabled people, who were encapsulated in the Equalities Act, got a benefit from the consolidation of other acts coming into one. So it was giving like gay people, lesbian people, all one piece of legislation that protects their rights. But they also took disabled people's legislation, which was dramatically more detailed and functionally more costly, and put it inside that and gave it a justification to cut the disabled people's support. And that means that the Equalities Act, whilst good for the rest of the collections of minorities, were not good for the disabled people. And that was because of the Conservatives, but also because the opposition party was just like, I'm not really going to oppose too hard. Like, they...
Because you want to get whatever... You want to get what you can get.
Yeah, the next thing they were voting on was something that they were putting forward. So it's kind of like, all right, well, we won't quite go against you if you don't quite go against us, and we will both get some little thing that we were aiming at.
Just to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. Whereas the person I was doing all the investigation about this with, because we started up a charity after finding this out, to basically give disabled people their own set of laws again that dictate how they should be treated, what support they should get, where it should go, who should give it, if it should be locally produced or if it should be nationally produced, but it should all be run with disabled people at the helm, so that they can tell us like what life is like as a disabled person and what they need to make their life work.
Yes, not someone who's fully abled.
Yeah, because like we spoke about racism earlier, and two white guys talking about race, it don't look good sometimes.
Exactly.
But Twitch is kind of oversaturated with white guys, so it's gonna happen.
To kind of go on what you were saying about kind of issues that are now being brought up that weren't around on the foundation of political parties. I mean, look at the Republican Party. The Republican Party was originally founded to break apart slavery, and that was like the first issue. I mean, platforms were switched early or mid to early 20th century, but when Republican and Democrat were formed, no one was talking about net neutrality. No one was talking about trans rights. No one was talking about a multitude of issues. I mean, the highway system, things like that. There's so many elements, which is why you have these people break off and make these, I'm a progressivist, I'm a neo-progressivist Democrat. And it's just kind of like, we shouldn't have to get to the point where I have 3 different terms to describe who I am politically. We should just upgrade our political system or move it. Like maybe Democrat and Republican aren't what we should be using to describe ourselves anymore. Maybe we should change that. But the only way that'll ever work is if a third party ever takes power. But I don't know how it is over there. A lot of the third parties are kind of just greeted with eye rolls and like, oh, it's third party. They don't actually matter. And it's just kind of like, do you realize how out of touch your party is, or my party, or any of these parties in other issues? And that's because we haven't taken the time to be like, hey, maybe we should polish up this whole Republican Democrat thing and actually kind of hunker down on what our issues are. Or if we decide that we can't do that from that, maybe take our time and make new political parties that we actually do agree with, because we are just kind of stuck in this way of like, I don't know how to get the best thing for my constituents, but I'm definitely going to look out for me and making sure that my next bill gets made. And it's just, that's a political machine that's operating, but I mean, is it operating efficiently?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's the thing. Like, although conversely, you just had Trump, and he's like an incapable dictator. Like he was, I feel like he was too stupid to be a proper dictator, but he was just smart enough to pull off enough to look like rhetorically, at least, he was very good at saying just the right thing to get people. What's the way that they described it? It was like, just because you don't say go out and riot
Yeah.
doesn't mean you haven't said everything else beforehand to lead people to that conclusion.
I think
Like,
I think
go on.
I'm not a Trump supporter in any means. But like everything, even though I disagree with him, I think there are some elements that politics kind of that a boon kind of happened in politics. I will say this: I don't agree with most of the things he said, but at the same time, there was a lot of things that he put into action that did improve things. There were uh, the economy was doing great. We had peace slowly. We were trying to get peace with North Korea, and the I don't want to say that what he was saying was in any way justifiable, but if a lot of people kind of threw around, and like you did, the term dictator, and it's we love using that term. Ever since the big bad evil guy of the human race, we always love throwing around that term dictator, and it's just he wasn't. He was an idiot. He was a fool who got into a race for clout and decided, I'm going to use the opportunity here to pay off all the favors I've ever accrued, which is why he stuffed it full of, businessmen. He was paying off favors. He was setting himself up for economic victory. He used his political power to gain business power in China. At the same time, I mean, it's not like other presidents did that, but now we look at Joe Biden, and it's just how many executive orders have he given out? Executive orders is in my opinion, a horrible slash to democracy, because that's the most kind of dictator thing a president can do, where they just wag a finger, write a pen, and something happens.
Yeah.
And we in America have this trend now where more and more presidents, as we progress further, each president has more executive orders. And anytime someone's like, well, Biden has a lot of executive orders, everyone's immediately like, well, all of his executive orders are undoing things that Trump did, so it's good. And it's just like, yeah, but when the next Republican comes around, he's going to do the exact same thing to Joe Biden, and the Republicans are going to say that's for the good. We are giving this power out, and we're going to basically just never justifiably look at ourselves and be like, yeah, the other side is going to say the same exact thing, though. And to go like he never blatantly encouraged rioting in the streets, but let's look at some of what the Democrats happened a couple months before with riots in the street about black police on black violence, and there were senators saying yes, go out and riot, and it's just, why is that okay, but this isn't? Like, I
Well,
understand that's an issue that needs to be solved, and it does. But you're never going to solve that issue by going down and burning local government, like local businesses. And those are the things that are going to hurt the most. And in an economic time, it's the politicians should be the adults. And throwing a tantrum and chucking something through a window should never be a solution that is viewed as viable or encouraged by said adults. So anytime anyone encourages a riot, it's kind of a negative in my opinion.
So do you think Trump thought he was going to win when he first found out, like when he went
No, I
wrong?
don't think so. I don't think so. I think it was the fault of the media for giving him news coverage. He came up, he said stupid stuff. He had the first debate, he had 2 minutes the entire time he was talking. But afterwards, when the news circulated, all they could find anything to discuss was about those 2 minutes that Trump was talking, not about anybody else's issues or takes on the matter. It's just like, look at this buffoon Trump. But because he was the only one getting news coverage, he's the only one that anybody was talking about. Therefore, he gained more traction. Therefore, he got more time to talk on a political stage during the debate and kept getting talked about and kept getting brought up. And I mean, he had done it before. He had ran for president before, and every time he dropped out of the race and went back to hosting The Apprentice.
Yeah, yeah.
And that time it just kind of was like, hey, I got a real shot here. And vulgarity and rhetoric spewed got him to a place. And
QAnon.
exactly, people don't like career politicians because for the same reason that, we've kind of discussed, it seems like there's a lot happening, but not really a lot is happening. And everybody's like, oh, an outsider will shake it up. And absolutely, an outsider might shake it up and might do good, but not the host of The Apprentice and failed Trump stakes should,
Yeah, yeah.
should not be that outsider we decided to pick.
Did you see that? Uh, Actually, I'll go back to what I wrote down just so that I don't forget. So there was a video that went out. I don't know how old it is, but it's kind of relevant to what you said. There was an older black man who was basically crying in the streets, shouting, going like, "Do you think this is during the rioting?"
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Do you think I didn't come from where you came from?" Talking to the rioters, like, "Do you think I am rich? Well, I'm not. You've just burnt down my business. This isn't right. This is not. I'm not the one to hurt."
Exactly.
And now, whilst that's a good point, I personally think the police station being burnt down was more justified
Absolutely.
because of the structure behind it, the police structure behind it, and the point they're trying to make. Whereas the Capitol Hill attack, well, attack's a strong word. Is it? Is it? They literally did break in. They smashed doors. They like attacked police officers. Like, I guess it's an attack. um, that one was fueled by QAnon, by far righters. Like, I saw so many people on that was stood there, like what's his name, the America First guy. Can't stand he got kicked off of
Uh,
D Live afterwards.
yeah, I know who you're talking about. There's a lot of those like
Nick Fuentes.
turning point USA, like a lot of those.
Turning Point.
Yeah.
I actually did really enjoy the Turning Point people having to deal with the America First people, like in their like Q&As. It was just so beautiful to watch that disintegrate into madness. Like, it was like, okay, so the Trumpers have been attacking the left quite a lot. Now they're going for the right. Like, I say
Yeah.
Trumpers, but that's difficult sometimes.
There's so much discourse within parties that each party has parties within parties, and it's just like, oh yeah, you're the right, but you're not really the right. You're not right enough to be on this part, and it's just like, oh,
Well,
it's so
that's
tiring.
that's what I get when I say, well, I'm a social democrat. And then my friends who are like socialist or communist, they'll be like, well, why aren't you communist already? And I'm like, because I don't think we need to get rid of capitalism completely to have a good society. I think we can regulate it well enough and use technology more to help the economy stay sustained.
Absolutely.
It's like it seems like when I was younger, and didn't know too much about politics, but I was just getting into it, I would hear the first like extreme thing that was said to me, and I'd be like, "Yes, that's exactly what I believe."
Yeah.
It's like, but then you start to think about it afterwards, and you're like, "Okay, well, if that was really implemented, how would it affect me?" And libertarian socialism, for example, necessitates a lot of responsibility on the individual. Um,
Communism would be great if everybody was perfect.
that,
Like,
yeah, there's that as well.
it's one of
Uh,
those like there's no perfect system because there's no perfect person. I like if everyone was virtuous in every manner, communism would clearly be the way to go because everyone would be looking out for everybody. I mean, capitalism works under the ideal that there are multiple types of people. One of them, some of them seek virtue and order, and some of them seek profiteering and ambition. And those two are supposed to be separate. One operates the government and one operates the private sector. But the problem is they're commingling
blending.
now, and they're like, oh, if I can get people in the political office and we can do backhand deals, and now the people who should be operating specifically within the business sector are operating our government like a business because people are flawed inherently. Like
Yeah,
there's no proper system that solves everything. We have to politics need to be fluid, and we need
yeah,
to fill and sometimes make compromises and do things that make us uncomfortable.
yeah. That's so true. Um, like the idea of going to a local council meeting sounds painful just in the sentence. Like
You're
it,
gonna you're gonna get a lot more done to affect your life in a local council than you will ever do electing a president or a prime minister.
it's so true because they are so distant from
Yeah.
you. Which, like, it's one of the arguments that actually convinced me a little bit at the time of Brexit because it was like I'm already 3 layers away from the powerful people,
Mm-hmm.
at least, right? And then you're adding another layer on top of that, which is the European Parliament, and
Okay.
then you're adding another layer part on top of that, which is the European Commission, who deal with the the way that it works is similar to the Senate and the House. The House will be the Parliament of the EU, and the Senate. No, wait, no, it doesn't work like that. The Commission decide on the laws first, and then they pass them down to the Parliament to be voted on. So really, the Parliament doesn't have much power to decide where the EU goes. It just decides. I guess it's kind of they're the players, and the Commission is the DM.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
House and Senate. It's and then you make the stupid, silly rules that we have where our Senate leader can decide to just not vote on something despite everyone wanting it to be voted
yeah.
on. Uh,
What I
you,
guess that must be there for some practical reason, other than just to be a dick about it.
I,
Like,
I love so much that the vice president, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but the vice president was originally, the vice president's secondary title is president of the Senate. They're supposed to be in charge of the Senate, but now they just kind of handle tie breakings. The reason that happened was because apparently when John Adams was vice president, he wouldn't shut up in the Senate House. So they had to actively change what the vice president could do because they were like, dude, you're not a senator. You don't get, as much debate time. You're supposed to just oversee us. Uh,
yeah,
and now, 200 and some years later, now we got rules that nobody knows all the rules.
but that was my frustration from the left. Sometimes is the ironic reactionary traits within the left. In a set, not in the usual way that you might use reactionary, but so like the force the vote idea. Did you see that? Where
No.
Pelosi, so Nancy Pelosi was up for re-election,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the online people like Jimmy Dore and It was mainly Jimmy Dore, and there was another podcast. Brianna Joy Gray is, I don't know what the podcast's name is, but they were pushing this idea that the Democrats, who are the squad, should hold Nancy Pelosi's position over her in the vote, so that they can gain a vote in the House, on the House floor, about Medicare for all.
Okay.
Right? Now, it's going to fail straight away because the House will vote to get Pelosi in rather than vote for they won't, there's not enough progressives to vote Medicare for all in through the House.
Yeah.
Then it's got to go through the Senate.
That's our problem. We just keep going through this kind of flippy floppy of like, all right, now these people get to decide everything because they have enough people.
Yeah. But the point that I would always make is, so why are they doing it? Like, why would you threaten the extra bit of power you have through Pelosi? And she is a great negotiator. She's done quite a lot of good things from the Democrat side to keep there's a bit more conformity sometimes once you get in the political stage, rather than through the primaries and the Twitter battles and all that. Once they're in the House, they do more cooperative stuff. But then it goes to the Senate and everyone's like, nah, fuck that. Like, whereas
because the Senate has just more power. I mean,
well, yeah, it's designed that way.
Yeah, the power of two, and it's designed to kind of be this: we oversee you, but at the end of the day, it's we lord over you.
Yeah, and the force the vote thing just made me realize that, like, the online discourse around politics is just like, this guy Jimmy Dore was saying AOC is a fraud now because she didn't do this thing for him, right? He's like, I am your constituents. I don't live in your state, and I don't live anywhere near where you're like ruled, but I'm your constituency because I have X amount of followers, and they all listen to me about you. And it was like it was a weird power play thing that I saw from him, and I was just like, you're not someone to follow anymore. You can stay in the Senate. Like,
but that's sort of a growing thing that's happening, not just politically. That's very much a thing. Like, you know, Instagrammers or other things. Like, I have X amount of followers. That means I've got this to say, and people should listen. And that's not inherently true either. Because a lot of times it's like, hey, I follow you for this reason. Doesn't mean you should have to do this.
That's actually really true. I just joined another community through trying to find other podcast guests and stuff. And this young lady's community is just so wholesome and, like, so nice. And there's just no tensions between them. And so for instance, if she has a mental health day where she's trying to look after herself instead of streaming, her chat will be supportive. They won't be like, well, we demand you to be streaming.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, well, I've seen chatters be like that to other streamers. So this is really nice. I'm going to stick around here. Because obviously, but then that breeds cooperation, and it breeds, like, a decent place to talk about difficult things. Because if you start from antagonism, you're just, like we said before, it's just going to go nowhere.
You got to be cooperative. You're nothing but followed by, you know, your fellow man, and if you're not listening to, life isn't a single player game. Life is a multiplayer lobby. Everyone else is living a life just like you, and you gotta respect that. It's not just what you want all the time.
Okay, so I've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. I
Because I've
imagine
got
it's pretty
some.
late over there for you.
Well, it's 6:20 in the evening,
Oh,
and I got a dog to feed and some food to cook for the missus and
of
all
course, of
that sort of
course.
stuff. I've left all the chores until the end of the day.
Sure. Yeah.
um,
So, what do you want to cover the last 10 minutes?
so I was going to see if you wanted to ask me anything,
Oof. Well,
and if you don't, it doesn't matter. But
no, 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 no. I just didn't know. Well, I guess to harken back to the beginning. What are your thoughts about D&D?
I love the sound of it. Sounds amazing, and I can see myself getting really addicted to the small details. Um, I ended up getting into philosophy recently, and it it's just battered my mind. The details that people go into, like how do you define the word belief and that kind of thing. And I've got addicted to listening to debates and stuff between philosophers. So the reason I say that is because I think the details within philosophy are the things that draw me in. So I think with D&D, there's enough there for me to go, okay, well, there's something I can get attached to.
I'm deeply grounded in philosophy myself, and I anyone can make an evil bad guy, and anyone can make a good world, and there's a lot of joy to me in the kind of let's ask questions, let's think, let's define fate and destiny. For instance, the he's not the main evil bad guy in my campaign. They haven't met that person yet, but the face of that to them is this man named Malin, who is a being. There's a race called Asimar, which are basically like if the gods designed a person and put them somewhere, they become an Asimar. It's like they're not better than humans, but they're humans designed specifically. And he was one of those, but it was one of those like, hey, the gods were way too late trying to save the earth, so they got here way too late, and life went to hell. The world went to hell. They basically got battered down. The world was destroyed so much that so many people lost what they wanted, and they kind of started to rebuild from there. But basic real evil bastard kind of grabbed this guy and started whispering him in the ear and convinced them that there was a deep magic because this person is the person that essentially created magic in the world and is almost a god. Told him there's a little secret thing that not enough people know about, but if the world is destroyed enough, everyone it gets reset and everyone kind of starts back again and gets another opportunity and things will unfold differently. And he's convinced of this now. It's basically if his religion was that there was a force in the universe that if enough destruction has occurred, things will be reset and opportunity basically starts over again. So you have this poor man who's like, I was here to save everyone, and instead I lost my brothers, my sisters, and my family died in my arms. You're telling me I have an opportunity to fix all of that? And so now the team is fighting this guy, and all they ever see is the evil bastard of him. And then when they had the conversation with him, it's just like, wait a minute, you're doing all of this because you can get your family back? It's like, well, now this kind of asks questions because it's like, is there a magical power? It turns out that there isn't, and he's getting manipulated, but he doesn't realize this. And it's just asked the questions of my players are seeing that things aren't exactly black and white, which is why I love
Yeah,
philosophy so very much. It's like, yes, this is the evil guy, and yes, he needs to be defeated, but he's not just, I want to destroy the world because I want to destroy the world. It's, I have a plan and I'm trying to do what's best, and now you have to compete against that. So I think philosophy is an important thing to take with you, and ultimately you can take whatever you want with you into the story and make it your own.
um, there's something you mentioned that reminded me of the TV show that we're watching. They're resetting and um, coming back. It's called Russian Doll. this show.
Yeah, I've seen
You
that.
watched it?
Yeah, I love that show.
We've got into like the third episode so far. Um, and to me, that show is like philosophy ingrained in. It's like
Well,
it's
it's
like the trolley problem.
yes, exactly. It
And
it is a brilliant show. I did really love that. I
I,
won't spoil anything, but it's really good. It goes pretty. I won't say too much, but you're
well,
absolutely right.
the other philosophy kind of like well, not unintended, but um, when I've said to other people who don't like philosophy or just aren't interested, that I saw a lot of philosophy in it, they just said, "Oh, you've just ruined the show for me," um, which I've never understood how that works. But um,
I
basically, this show is fuck it. Uh, the girl dies and she goes to what she thinks is heaven, but really it's not. It's somewhere the good place.
yeah, okay, the good place. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There is no heaven. There's just the good place.
Yeah, exactly. Um, that show, my God, I had to keep pausing it and just be like, but they're talking about like Hume. They're actually referencing like proper philosophy and doing it right, like on TV. They're not diluting it either. They're it's spot on.
It's spoken plainly.
Yeah, which like I really enjoyed the silent monk that turned out to not. He's,
Was just a guy who was just like everybody said I was supposed to be a silent monk, so I didn't say anything.
yeah, I mean that was the best bit of what's the word like safety. You got like self-preservation. Um,
I think my favorite line from the show is when the guy, like he was basically his perspective and his soul was in a place that no human was supposed to be, and he saw the folding of reality. And he's just like, I
yeah,
saw thousands of realities folded upon themselves in like a knife. And he's like, yeah, the time knife. We've all seen it, buddy. And it's just
yeah,
kind of like, I I actually took a concept from that and added made a character that was a monk that had like achieved enlightenment. So what do you do after you've achieved enlightenment? Well, you're gonna keep going on adventures, but everything from that moment is just kind of like, oh, have you ever seen anything so beautiful? And it's just like, yeah. All right, well, I'm gonna go meditate again, and it's just kind of like this, like, where do you go once you've seen, the veil's been pulled back, and it's just kind of like there is, oh my god, there's a fabric of reality, but there's the time knife, like it's just like reality's meaningless. It'd be like if you popped over and visited yourself in an alternate universe. It's like, well, okay, now everything has changed because now for the whole rest of your life you're gonna be like, what if I were that guy? Am I still me? Am I this person? And I love.
that's why WandaVision is so good.
I'm.
Uh,
We're almost caught up. I think I'm in one or two episodes behind. WandaVision's been great. It's uncomfortable to watch in the best way.
yeah, that's so that's perfect. I'm gonna say that to my girlfriend. like, like I made this up. Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, you don't even like. I mean, I imagine. Are you all caught up? I don't want to get any.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It at the beginning you feel sorry for Wanda because it's just like, what is happening to these people? And you're slowly like, oh, I think Wanda's the bad guy. Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just read the part. Spoilers for everybody, where she increased the size of the town to pull back Vision. I'm assuming that the people who are trying to steal Vision are secretly working for Hydra to try to be an asshole. But that's just because that's all Disney knows how to do.
My girlfriend said that the guy that is the leader of all the people with guns. I can't remember his name.
Oh, the FBI agent guy?
Yeah, yeah.
The
He's like
sword agent, yeah.
sword agent. Yeah, he's always like the reason why shit goes wrong. And my
Oh yeah.
girlfriend said, like, it's because he's a white male. What do you expect? I was just saying, what the fuck? Yeah, like,
There's always the dude on top with the guns who thinks he has that solution. I had that moment, the scene where they disagreed with the girl who had the like, who's like, oh, we got to go in there and stop Wanda. She's just grieving and she's not handling it well. And he's like, no, we got to bring in the guns. And it's just like, no, we shouldn't. And then he's like, you three, get out of here. And I'm like, what a stupid plan. I'm like, the astrophysicist that discovered what's actually happening, the one person who's been in and out and knows Wanda, and then and also has interacted with powerful superheroes, and the first responding officer on scene. You're going to throw away the three biggest assets you have because of a mild transgression with them.
That means to me that he's got a secondary plan that
absolutely.
they've just made easy. But yeah, I won't go further into that. Just in case I accidentally slip up and say something from the next few episodes that you haven't seen.
The fact that he was tracking Vision rather than Wanda means that he's not there for Wanda. He's there for Vision, and I can only assume that they're going to try to make a weapon out of him because that's what the bad guy always wants to do. He wants to weaponize whatever the good guys see as the good, pure, positive thing.
I really have you seen Dave Rubin recently talk about Thanos a lot?
No, I haven't. I know a lot of people
like
kind of talked less about him lately. Sorry.
Yeah, go on. I actually saw him live with Jordan Peterson in the UK once, and there's a great clip from a woman that's talking about her experience watching the exact one that I went to, and she was like, "It's so weird that Rubin would introduce Peterson because they are so vastly different in the types of content that they make and the things that they're doing that it feels almost like an insult to Peterson to have Rubin as his person that lets him in the door. Like he's like so Rubin has been using Thanos as an example for socialists. Yeah. So he's been saying that he's mixing it with 1984 a little bit, which is an interesting.
The two evidences of a hack right there. It's just like if 1984 is always being brought up, and if everybody's some sort of dictator or a socialist. It's just like the bad guy's the bad guy. You can call him Hitler, you can call him Stalin, socialist, capitalist, whatever you want. You're gonna find a justification for it in the end.
Well, that's the thing. Like he kept using the only reason he keeps using 1984 is because he's recently read it for the first time.
Oof.
Right. So he's a political science major
who's
that
never
didn't
read
1984. Like, is that not like I didn't go to university and I still read it? Like,
that's kind of. I imagine he's probably never read Animal Farm then.
Well, yeah, but then, like, he's doing this weird thing where, like, he was talking to Michael Knowles. You know Michael Knowles?
No.
So he's like a number 2 for the Daily Wire. He's a number 2 for Ben Shapiro, like, and they were doing a book club thing, Rubin and him, where 1984 was the book, and they were talking about it from a anti-government conservative perspective.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, so the way they spun it was that Big Brother is not the current USA, but Stalin's Russia, which I could see where he's coming from. But the point of Orwell's book, being a socialist himself, is to critique the authoritarian nature that is within the psyche of all of us in a sense. So we've all got some nature in inverted commas, but it just doesn't work that way. Like you can't force people to do everything you want.
No.
Even with a gun, eventually you're going to have to kill them.
You can sure try, though, you know?
Exactly. But his spin was a clear misunderstanding of Orwell's point, because he was trying to say that the conservatives are being treated like the main
tons and tons of real life examples of what 1984 is trying to express, and you don't need to say 1984 because most people haven't read the book, because it's a hard read.
It is. They made a film about it as well, which I didn't know. But it actually, I watched the first 20 minutes of it, and it is really accurate to the book. But I remember reading it for the first time. I was going through a bit of depression at the time, and I read 1984.
That's how you fix that.
That I don't recommend it to anyone. The irony of my conclusion was that we need a one world communist government, which makes no sense definitionally. It don't make sense functionally. And all I was trying to say was, I just need some help. That's all I was trying to say, but in different words. And I couldn't quite say it to everyone. So I tried to frame it in a way that everyone could understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, it made my dad, who's considerably more right-wing than I am, very angry, which neither here nor there anymore, because it doesn't matter. But the book, it just it really did make me go, I need to read more, like, because at the time I had the view of, if it's worth reading, they would make a film about it. So why do I need to read it?
Yeah, exactly.
And then my nan would always say, well, they've never made a decent film about the Bible. And I'm like, well, again, I'm not really interested in that book. But like,
I mean, The Stand was all right. That's pretty close.
And what's that? The film that quite a lot of biblically minded people really love, the crucifixion film.
Something of Christ.
Yeah,
I know the Mel Gibson film.
Yeah, the Mel Gibson. Yeah. That, I don't know if my nan would have approved of that adaptation of the Bible, because although she believed in it, she doesn't believe that, or didn't believe that the material that we consume through screens or through books should be to that extent. And I was just like, as a kid, I was always like, but that's the most fun. It's like
you got to find a way to engage somehow. You got to find something that brings them in, and well, that definitely the passion of the Christ.
That's it, the passion of the Christ.
That's what that certainly brought people in, was that, hey, it's a bloody, gory take on his final days. But
or the play about Mormons that the South Park guys did.
Oh yes.
The Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon is exactly what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, I met some Mormons before the lockdown. They came over from America. They were very pretty young ladies who were in the middle of the town center. They weren't doing any preachy stuff. They were just like stopping you whilst you were walking and just being like, "Do you want to talk about Mormonism?"
Not really.
Generally, I would have said not really, but for some reason I was in this really like inquisitive mood, and I set up 4 dates, not dates, but times of the week, for me to go and sort of question them to try and understand where they're coming from, because obviously from my end, the only type of Christianity I know is the Church of England Christianity, the Henry VIII kind of version.
Yeah.
and there are some other ones that I know a little bit about, but only a small amount. And whereas Mormonism, all I've heard is the jokes. Like this guy who found a magic rock that read a tablet that was translated in 10 different languages that only he could read,
With a special
and
pair of glasses.
yeah. Yeah, it sounds like the start of a D&D fucking character or something.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things where, like, as someone who doesn't really follow a religion, it's one of those things where it's just like it doesn't need a lot to disprove to disprove that one in my eyes. It's just like, so hold on, I can get on board with having faith, but like, I'm reading these plates and they say I'm in charge of this church. I'm like, hey, can I get a look at that? Nope, that's not what God wants.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of like, now now we're having questions. I think at the heart, the Mormon Church is a little questionable, but some of the nicest people are. I've met a
Well,
ton of Mormons, and they're just really good people.
that's what I got from them, is
Hmm.
that face to face, they have absolutely nothing um, antagonistic or worrisome until you ask questions about values that are diametrically opposed to what they have in their book. Um, although I ended up going from, well, I had to do this a lot. I was like holding the top of my nose, like, okay, hold back the anger and the annoyance of the circular logic, and just be nice and just ask nice questions. So I was asking kind of like tepid ones at the start, but then it got to things like, um, what do you mean by God? And why why does the existence of a God presuppose a need for belief? Um, and they were like, okay, well, we're not theologians, so like we don't know the ins and outs of what we believe. I was like, uh, what,
If you don't know it enough to explain it, what are you doing here?
yeah, like what what are you doing? And they were like, well, we don't usually get questions like that. And I was just like, okay, well, let's try a different one then. A question that you probably won't enjoy. Um, and this is like they're smiling away. They're like every question they say, the start of their answer is always, "Oh, that's a really great question. I'd love to answer it." Like really positive and engaging at the start of it. Um, and if I had any sort of personal story that would relate to their answer, they ask more questions about it and always seemed engaging. And I was like, I know what you're doing because I've been a salesman.
Yeah.
So I know that the only reason you're interested is to sell me the product of Mormonism. It's not a genuine, like, I've met a new person, I want to know who they are.
Yeah.
Um, and I ended up saying things like, well, what do you think about gay marriage? And they were like,
Not
uh,
great.
okay, so what we believe is that it says man and woman, therefore, no.
Or man and
Uh,
woman and woman and woman and woman and woman.
yeah. Um, but I brought up that there's a website where you can take scripture from the Bible and put in that line into this website, and it will give you the ancient derivatives. Well, I suppose the new one is the derivative, but the origin of those lines. And there's that one that's like, a man shall not lay with another man.
Hmm.
That second man had been replaced from the word boy, meaning don't be a paedophile.
And virgin from Virgin Mary comes from the term woman of marrying age.
So it doesn't even mean that you have to be a virgin.
Exactly. It
It
probably
just,
was a mistranslation.
yeah. Whereas the boy to man
Oh
translation
yeah, it's
was actively done. Um, whereas that one might have been a bit more like mistranslation. Easy done. Like Jordan Peterson actually pointed this out to me. He was like, the phrase, the what was it? The world shall be left to the meek, or something like that. Um, it doesn't mean that you're a weak person and you can't fend for yourself. It's a person that can defend themselves, like they have their sword sheathed. They have a weapon, but they choose not to use it, and that's like the mark of a wise person. Um, so to him, the interpretation is the world shall be left when all the damned people have gone to hell and all that. The people left over will be good people,
Yeah.
effectively, to restart the civilization. I was like,
The meek shall inherit the earth sounds a lot better than
that's
if you be kind, you'll live forever.
um,
Going back to Mormons real fast, the Stephen Fry had a great. He was on a tour once, and their headquarters in Utah. He was just there for the city, but they were like, "Hey, do you want to?" He was kind of gathered up into a tour, and one of their beliefs is that when you die, when you're in heaven, you'll like kind of put in a branch area where like all of your family is. And
yeah,
the logic is like, if you die, once you go, you'll be with your family forever. And he asked the question, yeah, but what if you were good? And they were like, yeah, you can go. And it kind of goes to that whole like exactly what you're saying. Like certain things mean certain things, and then they were slightly changed ever so to like from boy to man and things like that. And it's very much one of those you can take any old book and translate it and find a way to justify what you're trying to sell. And I'd rather find my morals not from a
yeah.
book at 2,000 years old.
Well, when I was going through my little depressive stage, I was watching a lot of Peterson, and it did help me because I had no structure to my life, and he was saying, "Well, clean your room," and I was just like, "Okay, I'll give it a try. Like, let's just see if it'll work," and it
Mm-hmm.
did. It kind of set up the day for like I've completed something. I'm not used to that whilst I'm depressed. That feels good. And like I understand that that was how he would hook people into his other stuff that he likes. Um, but it really helped. So um, oh fuck, I forgot why I was bringing that up. What were we talking about just beforehand?
I think not to step on your point, but I think what you're getting for is like you can. It's like the foot in the door phenomenon. Like if you give enough people like all the good
Yeah,
stuff to like, hey, do this, do this. Doesn't this feel good? Doesn't your soul feel better? Now let me
yeah.
now let me give you my rhetoric, and now this is now going to get intertwined as part of it as well.
Well, that's the thing. Like, when I do speak to religious people, like the Mormons, and I would say straight to their face, I'd be like, "Look, I don't need God to take the value from the teachings of the Bible. I can just say that they are good things to believe in. Like, for example, treat others as you wish to be treated.
Yeah, that's just a good. People have been
That's just a
saying that
good
for
thing.
it. That's people have been saying
Like,
that forever. I
yeah,
know. I a lot of people will say like, hey, look at the world. You're telling me that all this happened on accident. I'm like, isn't it so much more exciting that it happened on accident? Like, isn't it so much more like I know there were so many people who are like, "Oh, what would life be like if I, took away that kind of guidance and that sort of overarching this is where I come from, this is where I'm going." And it's so much more exciting that in a world of chaos, a one in a multi-trillion chance of you being created and you did. That's more a miracle to me than turning bread and I mean feeding enough people with bread and fish. It's just like we are our own little cosmic, thermodynamic miracles. We don't need to believe in these other ones. It's just like I find God through my interactions with other people. I'm like, hey, if we were stop worrying so much about what other people perceive as what a good religion was and just kind of focus on bettering ourselves and bettering those around us and being kind, it's like you will, quickly realize you don't need to have a heaven to escape to. You can make that. You can just better the world.
There's a question that threw me the other day that was like, that's it. It was, how do you justify good and bad without having like a a grounding, a philosophical grounding? Like, how do you say me? How do you say that Hitler was bad when you have no more objective framework as which to judge it by?
I think I think that it's that's tough to reflect on because you want to know what good is, but I think it just goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's just you recognizing that other people, like if me and you were trapped on a desert island and I stole your food and I could see you not surviving, I don't need someone whispering in my ear, hey, you just killed that person. Like, you should be able to just see, like, I shouldn't be able to lord over this person. That is not good. Like, anything that's knowingly causing a detriment to someone, I don't think you need a philosophical grounding. From the first time you accidentally killed a bug as a child, and you kind of got like, that thing was alive like I am, and now it's not. And everyone's kind of had something like that with it, like, be it a first goldfish or something like that. Even as children, you know what is good and what is bad. It's kind of like we don't come with a lot of coding built in already, but that's one of the things that we have is just humans together is better than humans alone.
I have a pretty. I have an example of that. Not so when I was younger, like maybe 9 years ago, something like that. I'm almost 30, by the way.
Same.
So, um, so basically, I was looking after my dad's house whilst he was away in Goa, and he has two dogs and three goldfish. And I woke up one day, and one of the fish had got stuck in the filter, and died overnight. So I took it, and it was really my stepmom's fish. The dogs are my dad's, and the fish are my stepmom's. And I decided that it would be really funny for me to fry the fish and video it and send the video to my stepmom. At the time, we weren't getting on very well, so I thought that was a really, really good thing to do. And I thought it was funny at the time. And now looking back, I've spoken to her about it, and we both agreed, yeah, I was a dick. Like you grow out of what you think is funny is not the high value that you think it is when you're younger. It's good, but like there are other things you should value above that.
Yeah, the jovialness kind of loses its flair after some time.
Yeah, like I watched a video back a few months ago. I was like, Jesus. Yeah, I just shouldn't have done it. No. like
I have that.
I think.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, no, I don't. No, go ahead.
No, I basically finished. Karen.
Oh, I'm of the opinion that there are just so many. There are so many content creators and videos out there that are pranks, and it's just like you're not doing a prank. You're just going up and being a dick to a stranger, and then when they react, you're like, "No, dude, it's a prank. Look, there's a video." I'm like, that's not what a prank is. Like, I understand. There's funny things you can do. There are things you can it's fun when like the pranks like offsetting reality or making a weird situation occur and acting as if it's completely normal and having people go like, wait, what? Like, that's funny. But, just going up and stealing someone's food and calling that a prank, it's just like, there's a fine line between just being a dick and being something that's enjoyable.
Okay. We are running up
Oh
to
yeah,
3 hours now.
yeah.
That was a long 10 minutes.
Yes, it was.
Um,
I was gonna say, I was like, we said 10 minutes. I think half an hour ago.
yeah. So if there's anything that you want to say, like, where can everyone find you?
Um,
And
all over the place. I have a YouTube page, links to which is in the description. It doesn't have a nice, funny thumbnail. I'm not there yet. But twitch.tv/the_arcanist. Twitter at the Arcanist Owl. That's me. Facebook.com/ArcanistGames. ArcanistGames.com. I'm all over the place. You can find me everywhere. And what about you, sir? You can feel free to.
yeah, stop. Um, yeah, so I'm NPC HCA. I originally started doing the channel about health, and there's a few videos way back when of me talking about some skills that I learnt recently from the job. But where you'll find me is twitch.tv/NPC_HCA. I do have a link tree that I might just drop in your chat.
Go for it.
And I'll do it once we've finished because I desperately need the loot. So, so I'm going to say goodbye. And if you do want to check me out, the link tree will be in the chat afterwards. All right?
Absolutely. Everybody go over there, drop the man a follow. This has been
So-
fun.
Yeah, it has. It's been great. And I will probably contact you again to see if I can join in with a D&D at some point.
Sure, between D&D, any other topics, got lots of things to talk about, but you got stuff to do.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oop, that's going to end out and make things awkward on the TV. Give me a second. All right, here we go. Yeah, that's going to look ugly for a bit. Ignore that. Thank you, everybody. Close that. All right. Oh, we'll handle that later. You won't get to see me. Sorry, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Make sure you go and check him out. That is actually really fun, and I hope I see you guys later.